We're here today to discuss the challenges that American workers and businesses faced over the last 4 years, as well as the opportunities before us as President Trump and a Republican-led Congress move forward with solutions to get the nation's workforce on track. From its first day, the past administration implemented a policy agenda that I believe jeopardized the American workforce and economy. In the wake of COVID-19 pandemic, the nation experienced historic levels of job loss. I believe the problem was exacerbated by policies of the last administration enacting COVID mandates that rewarded Americans for staying home and out of the workforce. Democrat stimulus spending hampered job creation and made more Americans dependent on the federal government. And as a result of the Biden-Harris administration's reckless spending spree, American families and businesses were rocked by record high inflation, which hit a 40-year high in 2022. Workers saw their standard of living decline as inflation outpaced average wage growth. On top of that, the Biden-Harris administration pursued a radical regulatory agenda which put up barriers to hiring and harmed American workers and businesses. One example of this regulatory onslaught included the National Labor Relations Board and its joint employer rule, which threatened to upend the franchise business model, limit entrepreneurship, and literally kill jobs, had it not been halted by a federal court. An economic analysis found that a similar joint employer standard, which was in effect during the Obama administration, cost the entire franchise sector $33.3 billion annually, resulting in as many as 376,000 lost job opportunities. Another regulation raised the salary threshold for employees to be considered exempt from overtime pay by more than 60%. This rule would have cost job creators an estimated $1.3 billion, increased compliance burdens on small businesses, and limited workers' opportunities for advancement had it not been halted by a federal court. Yet another regulation made it harder for individuals to choose how they work. The war on independent contractors stifled innovation and creativity, ultimately harming workers, businesses, and the U.S. economy. And this list is not exhaustive. A recent study from the American Action Forum found that the Biden administration issued a staggering $1.8 trillion in cumulative regulatory costs over 4 years, far exceeding any preceding administration on record. Many of the challenges from the last 4 years still remain. But with President Trump back in office and a Republican-led Congress, workers and job creators are increasingly optimistic for the return of pro-growth economic policies that unleash the ingenuity and entrepreneurial spirit of the American workforce. Following the 2024 elections, small business optimism surged, reaching the highest point since October 2018. Just this week, Apple announced plans to invest more than $500 billion in the U.S. and hire 20,000 workers over the next 4 years to support American innovation and manufacturing. President Trump is already making good on his promise to root out wasteful spending and to stop the job-killing regulatory blitz. Upon taking office, he ordered a review of all pending regulations and signed an executive order directing federal agencies to eliminate 10 existing regulations for each new regulation issued. There's also optimism that Congress and the President will extend many provisions of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act of 2017 and enact new tax proposals to benefit working families and businesses. Following enactment of the 2017 Tax Act, working Americans saw real wages rise nearly 5% in 2018 and 2019, the fastest growth in 20 years. And this Congress, the Committee on Education and Workforce, will consider legislative proposals to improve the lives of American workers, reduce burdens on small businesses, address critical workforce shortages, and stimulate economic growth. Before I turn to the ranking member for his opening remarks, I want to recognize a committee staffer who has served both the majority and the minority. Sheila Havener, the committee's information technology specialist, or guru, is retiring after more than a decade of public service. She has been an invaluable asset, supporting the operations of the committee and its staff, and may I add, getting our electronic voting up and running when everybody else was telling me, back off, Wahlberg. Don't push it so hard. We've got to go through the process. She got it done, as you all know, and it worked flawlessly, except for my verbiage. She'll be missed, and I wish her the best in her well-deserved retirement. And so I would ask a suitable show of appreciation. Thank you, Sheila. With that, I yield to the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And before I begin my remarks, let me associate this side with your remarks about Sheila Havener. She has, for the past 11 years, worked tirelessly for the committee and has worked under Democratic and Republican leadership, handling a range of information and technology issues flawlessly. And so, Sheila, thank you for your service and look forward to your next step. Thank you. I'd like to thank our witnesses for being here today and thank today's full committee hearing. The first labor-related one for the 119th Congress comes just as President Trump completed his first month in his second term. It's important to be clear about the economy and labor market that President Trump and congressional Republicans inherited, as they are now completely in charge of the federal government. During the previous 4 years, during the Biden administration, the economy created 16.2 million jobs, breaking the record for jobs created for any single presidential term. And in fact, since Ronald Reagan in 8 years was the highest job creator for Republicans, he created 16.1 million jobs. So President Biden created more jobs than any Republican president in history, whether they served 4 or 8 years. You're gonna have the charts. That's the other one. That's the deficit. Yeah. Okay. And this chart shows the president's job creation, average monthly job change by administration, showing Joe Biden leading the pack, and Donald Trump with the worst job performance in about 100 years. The unemployment rate fell from 4.6% in January 2021 to 4% in January 2025. The unemployment rate has been at or below 4.2% since November 2021. And as Dr. Shierholz will note in her excellent testimony, the last time the United States saw unemployment this low was about half a century ago. Now, for those who are interested in fiscal responsibility, I'll remind people, next chart, that every Democratic president since Kennedy has left office with a better deficit situation than they inherited, and every Republican president since Nixon has left office and left for their Democratic successors a worse deficit situation than they inherited, all without exception. Further, President Biden was the first president on record not to have a single month of seasonally adjusted job loss. And at the same time, between 2019 and 2023, the low-wage workers experienced historically fast real wage growth The labor force participation for prime-age workers reached the highest level in more than 20 years, and in 2023, roughly 22% of the people with a disability were employed, the highest recorded ratio since comparable data was first collected in 2008. This remarkable progress came as our country emerged from the COVID-19 pandemic, and the progress was not inevitable. It was a result of policy choices made by congressional Democrats to ensure that workers were prioritized and benefited from public investments. For example, with the multi-employer pension fund on the brink of collapse, Democrats saved the pensions of more than 1.3 million retirees, protecting nearly 10,000 businesses already to date. Regrettably, not one Republican voted to save the pensions of these 1.3 million retirees. Democrats also capped out-of-pocket insulin costs for Medicare at $35 a month. Again, not a single Republican voted for this landmark reform. Unfortunately, the progress we worked so hard to achieve during the last 4 years and the economic gains that were made as a nation, while other countries struggle to overcome global inflation, are at risk. And how can we be confident that the Trump administration and congressional Republicans, who again are in complete control of the federal government, President, House, and Senate, will be effective stewards to the strong economy that they have inherited? But there's evidence that they're not going to be good stewards. It's been a little over a month, and so far the second Trump administration has been filled with the same nonstop chaos, confusion, and unprecedented, and in some cases illegal, actions characterized by its first term. So far, President Trump has rescinded the landmark Executive Order 11246 from the 1960s that protects federal contract workers and job applicants from unlawful discrimination. He illegally fired inspectors general at the Labor Department and several other agencies who are charged with rooting out waste, fraud, and abuse. He illegally fired Gwen Wilcox, the first black woman to serve on the National Labor Relations Board, leaving the NLRB without a quorum to function and issue decisions. Fired 2 EEOC commissioners, Charlotte Burrows and Jocelyn Samuels, who were in the middle of their terms. This has never happened before in the agency's 60-year history, leaving the EEOC without a quorum to address claims of illegal workplace discrimination. President Trump also allowed unelected billionaire Elon Musk and his Doge team to invade the Labor Department and apparently access sensitive data. While the full extent of Doge's intrusion into the department systems is unknown, the fact is that they may have access to our constituents' personal or private data, as well as case files on active criminal and civil investigations, including ones that may relate to Elon Musk's own companies. I've asked if this access includes access to files on investigations that include the name of confidential witnesses or whistleblowers, whether or not it includes access to sensitive statistical information like job numbers before they become public, access to his competitors' bids, so he'll know how to bid. And, Mr. Chairman, we have not received any answers. We're now hearing about abrupt firings of civil servants in at least 6 Labor Department agencies, including Mine Safety and Health Administration, even though staffing disruptions at MNSHA were among the factors that led to the Upper Big Branch mine disaster that killed 29 miners 15 years ago this April. And this is outrageous, and my Democratic colleagues and I have been demanding answers. And Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to enter several oversight letters into the record that have been asking these questions.
Without objection, they'll be entered.
And Mr. Chairman, I invite you to join our efforts to ask Elon Musk and Doge questions about what they are doing and whether or not, so that we can get some sense of what they have access to, why they need access to it, and what they're doing with the information. And so I'd hope you would join us, and our staff will be contacting your staff to see what we can do to not do anything, just ask questions to see what they are doing. But finally, I noted this hearing is about, quote, unleashing America's workforce. It comes the same week as the House Republicans passed a budget resolution that would give trillions of dollars of tax cuts to billionaires and corporations at the expense of American workers and families. Specifically, the budget resolution directs our committee to come up with at least $330 billion in savings. That means in the coming weeks, the Republicans in this committee are likely to massively cut critical student loan programs and other educational programs and school meal programs for our kids, other kinds of programs in the health and labor areas, all to help finance a $4.5 trillion tax cut for the wealthy. The consequences of these cuts will hurt our workforce, harm the public, and threaten our economy. And just as smart, sensible, pro-worker policies helped establish a strong economy over the past 4 years, reckless and fiscally irresponsible policies will undo that progress. And I say fiscally irresponsible because after all the mean-spirited cuts and tax cuts for the wealthy, we end up with a deficit that's worse than the one we have now. So I would hope that we could do better, and I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman, and I think you all see we'll have a spirited debate that goes on here, and that's a good thing. But I tell you, to my ranking member, if all of that was true, I wouldn't vote for myself. But I have. So let's get on with it. Pursuant to Committee Rule 8C, all members who wish to insert written statements into the record may do so by submitting them to the committee clerk electronically in Microsoft Word format by 5:00 p.m., 14 days after the date of this hearing, which is March 12th, 2025. And without objection, the hearing record will remain open for 14 days.
Reserving the right to object. Mr. Chairman, on my reservation, if you think anything I said was not true, I would like you just to name it, and we'll discuss it. I withdraw my reservation.
I appreciate my ranking member bringing that up. We'll have those opportunities. But today we have a hearing that I'm looking forward to hearing the witnesses and our discussion. Without objection, the hearing record will remain open for 14 days to allow such statements and other extraneous material referenced during the hearing to be submitted for the official hearing record. I'll now turn to the introduction of witnesses. Our first witness is Ms. Rosanna Maietta, who is the President and CEO of the American Hotel and Lodging Association, which is located in Washington, D.C. Welcome. Our next witness is Dr. William Beach, who is a Senior Fellow in Economics at the Economic Policy Innovation Center, located in Washington, D.C. Welcome. Our third witness is Dr. Heidi Shierholz, who is the President of the Economic Policy Institute in Washington, D.C. Welcome. Our final witness is Ms. Elizabeth Milito, who is the Executive Director of the National Federation of Independent Business, NFIB, Small Business Legal Center in Washington, D.C. Welcome to the hearing. We thank you all for being here today and look forward to your testimony. I'd like to remind the witnesses that we have read your witness statements, which will appear in full in the hearing record. I would ask that you each limit your oral presentation to a 3-minute summary of your written statement. The clock will count down from 3 minutes because committee members have many questions for you, and we'd like to spend as much time as possible on questions and answers. Pursuant to Committee Rule 8D and committee practice, however, we will not cut off your testimony until you reach the 5-minute mark. I also would like to remind the witnesses to be aware of their responsibility to provide accurate information to the committee. And so I now first recognize Ms. Maietta for her testimony.
Good morning, Chairman Wahlberg, Ranking Member Scott, distinguished members. Thank you for allowing me to testify today. My name is Rosanna Maietta, and I am proud to represent the American Hotel and Lodging Association as its president and CEO. The 64,000 hotels across America support more than 9 million jobs. These hardworking Americans are in every community. The majority of hotels around the country are Main Street small businesses. We are a vital part of a thriving America, a place where the American dream can still be achieved. But 5 years on from COVID-19, our industry has not recovered. At the height of the crisis, America's hotels lost more than 680,000 workers. Now, we are down nearly 200,000 employees. We are taking major steps to address workforce shortages. Hotels haven't just increased wages, we've raised wages 15% faster than the national average. We've provided more flexible hours and expanded benefits. We invest in apprenticeships that help workers build new skills and advance their careers. Through partnerships with schools and local organizations, we are creating lasting career pathways. Yet persistent workforce shortages remain. Inflation has been another headwind. Costs increases are far outpacing revenue growth. For America's hotels, costs have soared from goods to building materials to property insurance. Many small businesses have been forced to raise prices, yet still struggle to keep their doors open. Congress can help. First, until it was overturned, the NLRB's joint employer rule would have led to higher costs and fewer opportunities for workers. We urge Congress to pass the Save Local Business Act and codify the traditional standard that serves millions of franchise workers and small businesses. Second, we agree with President Trump that legal guest worker programs are part of the solution to workforce challenges. And third, like all small business owners, hotel owners need Congress to extend the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Without congressional action, hoteliers face a massive tax hike that would devastate our industry. These important provisions include extending the small business deduction, renewing bonus depreciation for capital investments, and preserving the like-kind exchange to promote job growth and economic development. And we urge Congress to allow the hardest working Americans to keep more of what they earn through no tax on tips. As the cornerstone of every community around America, hoteliers are eager to work with Congress to drive more job creation around the country. We look forward to continuing to work with this committee and incoming Secretary Chavez-DeRemer to ensure our industry remains an essential contributor to our nation's economy. Thank you.
I thank the lady. Dr. Beach, and I recognize you for your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman Wahlberg and Ranking Member Scott, members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to testify today. Just as an additional biographical matter, and maybe I'm a bipartisan witness this morning, I ran the Bureau of Labor Statistics for 2 years under President Trump and 2 years under President Biden. So there are two ways to view labor force trends. First, from a policymaker's perspective, and second, from a worker's point of view. Now, policymakers generally and understandably focus on broad indicators like unemployment and job growth. Workers, on the other hand, care more about job openings, wages, and maintaining their standard of living. Let me start with the policymaker's perspective, which is a big picture way of seeing labor markets. My submitted testimony underscores two big picture trends. Some data suggest growth, while others point to continued employment slowdown, which began in 2022. This slowdown has recently been accompanied by an uptick in unemployment. Then there's the worker's perspective, which includes developments closer to home, like job opportunities, job turnover, and the purchasing power of a worker's income. My submitted testimony shows that job openings are sharply down, over 1 million fewer job openings than a year ago. Wages have started to flatten, and inflation since mid-2021 has eroded workers' purchasing power, making essentials like housing, food, and gas more expensive. Wages have not kept pace with inflation, leading to a decline in living standards. What should Congress do in the face of these trends? I believe that Congress must take action to support productivity and economic growth, primarily on two fronts: through regulatory relief and making the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act permanent. On the regulation front, research that I've just published shows that freezing or reducing regulations can stimulate economic activity as much as tax reform and could lower the inflation rate by 0.7%. Increased productivity is the key, since it enhances every aspect of working life. Additionally, addressing the federal budget deficit is absolutely crucial. Since 2020, deficits have fueled inflation by distorting the price system and increasing debt. By practicing fiscal restraint and signaling lower future deficits, Congress can help the Federal Reserve fight inflation and support economic activity. Combined with higher productivity and economic growth, these steps will strengthen wages and improve the standard of living for American workers and the families they support. I'm eager to answer any questions you may have for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Shierholz, we welcome you to testify.
Thank you. Chair Wahlberg, Ranking Member Scott, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. We are meeting to discuss unleashing America's workforce and strengthening the economy. However, this discussion is occurring while this very chamber moves forward with a budget that will make draconian cuts to health care and food assistance for children and families, hurting millions of America's workers and weakening our economy. These cuts aren't even being made in the name of responding to a national emergency or reducing deficits to boost future growth. They are being made to create fiscal space for tax cuts that will go overwhelmingly to this country's wealthiest households. And those tax cuts are such massive giveaways to the rich that they will increase the deficit by trillions, even with the draconian cuts for the most vulnerable. Nothing about this serves America's workforce or strengthens the economy. To be clear, sometimes you do need larger deficits to spur a weak economy, but that is not where we are today. Today's economy is very strong with historically low unemployment rates, which means larger deficits will likely put a drag on economic growth. And the spending cuts will cause enormous damage to this country's most vulnerable households, with tens of millions losing health coverage through Medicaid, tens of millions receiving less help in buying groceries from SNAP or being cut off completely, many others seeing the cost of their student loans rising, and on and on and on. When the Trump administration took office last month, the unemployment rate was 4%, and it had been at or below 4.2% for 39 months. The last time the unemployment rate was that low for that long was in the 1960s. Also, the Bureau of Labor Statistics data show that the purchasing power of workers' wages, i.e. wages after taking inflation into account, that purchasing power was higher in 2024 than it was at the business cycle peak of 2019 and at any point before that. And that was true across the board for low-wage workers, middle-wage workers, and high-wage workers. That is what unleashing America's workforce and strengthening the economy looks like. This administration's actions during its first month in office, along with its backing of the extremist House budget plan, makes it abundantly clear that their agenda will be profoundly destructive to incomes and economic security for both the most vulnerable families and for the broad middle class. Further, the chaos and uncertainty the administration is sowing in key economic institutions could cause a full-blown crisis if it is not stopped. If you were truly interested in unleashing America's workforce and strengthening the economy, you would enact policies designed to protect and fortify a strong public sector and provide excellent public services, not gut an already tiny federal workforce and attack state and local government workers. You would help to ensure that all workers who want a union can get a union and get a collective bargaining agreement, not strip the National Labor Relations Board of its independence and make it a tool for union busting. You would implement tax policy that ensures the health of critical programs like Medicaid, Social Security, and SNAP, not advance measures that give tax cuts to the wealthiest at the literal expense of poor children, the sick, and the elderly. None of these top administration priorities have anything to do with unleashing the country's workforce or strengthening the economy. Theirs is not an agenda of prosperity. It is a reckless, cynical dismantling of the very foundations that make economic opportunity and progress possible. I look very forward to your questions.
Thank you. Now I recognize for her witness testimony, Ms. Milito.
Thank you, Chairman Wahlberg, Ranking Member Scott, members of the committee, and staff who are here today. I very much appreciate your attention. NFIB, the National Federation of Independent Business, represents small businesses nationwide in every industry and in every state. NFIB members are your local hardware store, the restaurant where your family eats on Friday nights, the mechanic who fixes your car, the plumber, roofer, and landscaper who work on your home. Small businesses employ nearly half the country's private sector workforce. It is estimated that 68 cents of every dollar spent at a small business is reinvested in the community. When small businesses succeed, communities flourish. Unfortunately, over the last 4 years, small businesses have weathered storm after storm, including COVID shutdowns, supply chain disruptions, historic inflation, a burdensome regulatory environment, and systemic workforce shortages. It is no surprise that small businesses weren't particularly optimistic during the last administration. Following the November election, small business optimism surged, reaching the highest point since October 2018. The election results signaled that a major shift to the nation's economic and regulatory policy was on the horizon. Although small businesses remain optimistic, economic uncertainty lingers. The expiration of key provisions included in the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, like the 20% small business deduction, creates the threat of a massive tax increase for over 30 million small businesses in a little over 10 months. In fact, the January 2025 Small Business Economic Trends Survey showed that the uncertainty index had increased. This reading stresses the urgent need for Congress to provide small businesses with certainty so they can resume planned investments in their business and workforce without the possibility of a massive tax hike. In addition, small businesses continue to struggle to fill positions. Owners are increasing compensation and benefits, but staunchly oppose one-size-fits-all, inflexible and costly mandates from Washington, D.C. and state capitals around the country. Between 2021 and 2024, small businesses experienced a regulatory tsunami that added $1.8 trillion in regulatory costs. These costs disproportionately impact small businesses that operate without compliance officers, lawyers, or human resource departments. Making it more expensive to hire employees will not lead to more hiring. For this reason, small businesses viewed President Trump's commitment to rolling back unnecessarily burdensome and duplicative regulations as one of his first term's greatest accomplishments. Small businesses are optimistic that the second Trump term and the 119th Congress will implement pro-growth tax, labor, regulatory, and economic policies. However, threats do loom on the horizon. Congress and the administration can work together to create a pro-business environment, but you must reject policies that increase uncertainty. On behalf of the small business owners of NFIB, thank you again for your time today.
Thank you, and I thank each of the witnesses. Under Committee Rule 9, we will now question the witnesses under the 5-minute rule. I ask members to keep your questions succinct so the witnesses have time to answer. I will recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning. Ms. Milito, you have pointed out that business optimism surged after the November elections. And yet you also pointed out in your testimony that the surveys found that the challenges remain, which are leading to uncertainty for small businesses. Can you elaborate further on how the Biden administration's policies have created these challenges for small businesses, and also what are some of the ways that the Trump administration and Congress can address these challenges? Please elaborate further.
Thank you, Chairman Wahlberg, for that question. So small business optimism, as I said, surged in November and again in December, highest level since 2018, so there is no denying the Trump effect, I will call it. October, November saw the largest increase in our optimism index in the 51-year history of the survey, so that's pretty astounding there. And small business owners are impatient. They want to get going, so they are going to hold President Trump to his promises for the deregulatory efforts there. They're eager for, 10 out, 1 in to get underway there. So they're very, very optimistic that things are going to improve, the landscape's going to improve. There are a lot of expectations, though, however, that Congress is going to need to come through and, extend or make permanent the tax cuts from 2017. That is just absolutely critical. As I mentioned in my opening statement, those tax cuts, there are over 30 million small businesses that are depending on this Congress to pass the Main Street Tax Certainty Act and make sure that small business, 20% small business deduction is made permanent. So that is just absolutely critical, and uncertainty regarding what Congress is going to do with that.
Which impacts, I'm
Impacts, yeah.
certain the employees of the small businesses as well. Middle
Absolutely,
income.
absolutely. And my written testimony talks about ways that my members have used that tax cut to invest directly in the workforce, in the business, in the employees, and in the communities. That is how they are using that tax cut.
Thank you. Ms. Maietta, the Biden National Labor Relations Board's final rule, the joint employer rule, upended traditional direct and immediate control standard and created an expansive and vague standard for determining joint employer. The Biden joint employer rule was rebuked by bipartisan majorities in the House and Senate during the 118th Congress and was ultimately vacated by the federal court. For franchise hotels, how important is it to have a clear joint employer standard, and would the Save Local Business Act provide that clarity?
Thank you, Chairman Wahlberg. Absolutely. Clarity and certainty is needed in business. That joint employer measure under the Biden administration would have devastated our industry, decimating it virtually overnight by creating and injecting an incredible degree of uncertainty around who controls the relationship between the employer and the employee, eliminating the ability for a small business owner to make decisions about how to run their business day to day, and removing some of the protections that are so important around brand standards, around health and safety protocols that our guests and our employees rely on. The Save Local Business Act eliminates that. And also what's really important for us is to ensure that as administrations change, the legal standard is codified into law so that we don't have to worry from administration to administration what's going to happen next.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Beach, inflation has attacked Americans over the past 4 years, even with decreasing inflation rates since 2022. How has inflation affected workers the past 4 years, and how has it affected those wanting to start or expand businesses?
Well, thank you very much for that question. When we look at inflation, we need to take a longer view, and we need to begin with that month when inflation really took off and look at its cumulative effect over time. So about 30% of the loss in purchasing power that workers experienced from mid-2021 on has been regained, but that means 70% has not. Those are my calculations. That means that it is still difficult to purchase the things that were discretionary before. For example, if you were doing after-school tutoring of your children, that might be sacrificed now in order to pay your rent. Your rent and your food might exclude insurance payments. They might exclude the purchase of a new vehicle. They might force you into a bus route, and that's one of the worst things for low-income people and middle-income people when they have almost no discretion on where to purchase. So it reverberates on and on and on. The point is, we've made progress on inflation, but we still have a long way to go.
Thank you. Appreciate your responses. Now I recognize the gentlelady from Oregon, Ms. Bonamici.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. So this is a hearing about unleashing America's workforce and strengthening the economy. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend that everything is normal. My mother was a small business owner. I have family members who are small business owners. But right now, there's many unprecedented and illegal actions that the Trump administration and DOGE are taking against the federal workforce. Donald Trump and Elon Musk and DOGE have fired more than 30,000 federal workers across the country, and with what appears to be little planning and even less justification. Needless to say, this has created an enormous amount of chaos, which is harmful not just to the federal workforce, but also to the economy. I just did 5 town hall meetings in Oregon, and not just in urban areas, and people are stressed and really anxious. They are concerned that Musk and Doge are accessing their sensitive personal data and the government's previously secure and confidential data systems. They're worried about Social Security numbers, their home addresses, citizenship and disability status, work records, family income, and maybe bank account information. Well, now, I believe it was yesterday, the White House said, well, Elon Musk isn't in charge of Doge. Well, maybe that's because Elon Musk now appears to have access to his business competitors' tax records and financial information in what could be a pretty flagrant and massive case of corporate espionage. So let's just say people are really concerned, and that's having implications. So despite the title of this hearing, the American workforce has not been unleashed, and our economy has not been strengthened, quite the contrary. In my home state of Oregon, agricultural researchers in rural Oregon were purged as a result of cuts at the USDA. The Oregon Health and Sciences University, Oregon's largest recipient of funding from the National Institutes of Health, could lose tens of millions in federal funding. That's going to halt medical research and upend the lives of patients and with the work of scientific researchers. The cuts to the U.S. Forest Service will leave Oregon more vulnerable to wildfires. And shockingly, about 100 staff at the Bonneville Power Administration, their purging could leave Northwest Oregon and the entire region facing brownouts and blackouts. That would be devastating for the entire economy of the Pacific Northwest. And it's especially outrageous because the Bonneville Power Administration is ratepayer funded, so it doesn't save any money, but still those people were purged. So there's a lot of chaos out there. And now Bloomberg is reporting that this mass government employee termination that we've seen at other agencies is happening at the Department of Labor. So Dr. Shierholz, I'm going to ask you, because I know Ms. Milito talked about how we have to resist uncertainty. There's a tremendous amount of uncertainty. So Dr. Shierholz, if Elon Musk and Doge fire large numbers of employees at the Department of Labor, safety inspectors, people who assist with unemployment or workers' compensation or do the other work of the department, what effect does that have on the working people in Oregon and across the country, but also what effect does this kind of chaos have on the economy overall?
This has a devastating effect on the ability of DOL to do their work. The chaos and attacks on federal workers will deeply harm the Labor Department's ability to attract and retain top talent, for example. When career officials feel undervalued or face instability, which is clearly what the Trump administration is trying to make them feel, it slows policy development, it slows policy implementation, it weakens enforcement, it ultimately just hurts their ability to serve America's workers. And I believe that is a core reason behind the actions of the Trump administration. It seems abundantly clear that the administration views that as a feature, not a bug of what they're doing.
Well, how does that affect the economy overall?
It puts the big strain on the economy. So one of the things I think that people don't understand, that like the work of federal workers is so much a part of our daily lives that people don't even understand what is happening. Like, you go into the grocery store, you know you can buy food that is safe because of the work of workers at the Federal Food and Drug Administration. You drive on roads and you know you can arrive where you want to go safely because of the standards and the enforcement of the Department of Transportation, and on and on and on. Though the crucial work of our federal workforce is what is the underpinning of public services and our stable economy. And you got that workforce, and you see a lot of those things crumble. And the other thing that is useful saying, our federal workforce is tiny. It is already very, very shoestring. It is less than 2% of all payroll employees. The idea that we're going after this workforce that is protecting the American people is just outrageous.
And I just want to thank you, Dr. Shierholz. I just want to emphasize again as I yield back that these purges of federal employees are going to create long-term harm. But also we have thousands of people now additionally unemployed because they lost their job with some promise of payout, which apparently has not been authorized. So again, uncertainty is what's happening, not what this administration is fighting. I yield back.
Gentlelady's time has expired. Now I recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I would note, I just looked, there are 7.6 million job openings in this country right now that need to be filled. So I think there's plenty of opportunity for those folks who are looking for a change in career to apply for a job in the private sector. And it's stunning to me that people do not think that folks who work for the government are capable of working in the private sector. I mean, for crying out loud, you got to be kidding me. With the staggering number of issues facing our workforce, I'm honored that Chair Wahlberg asked me to serve as chairman of the Health Subcommittee at this Congress. As showcased in this hearing, we have no shortage of work to get done. With that being said, Mrs. Milito, why do small businesses choose to offer health benefits to their employees, even if they are not required by law?
So thank you very much. First of all, Mr. Allen, I would like to thank you for your support of the Main Street Tax Certainty Act and the 20% small business deduction. We are very grateful and thankful for your support on that there. So small businesses, when they look to hire and retain employees, and as you mentioned, there is a tremendous workforce shortage there, they look first to boost wages. And then the second benefit they'll offer is paid time off. And the third benefit they try to offer is health care. So health care is critical, and over 30% of small businesses do offer health care. It's a costly benefit, as you know, but it is so important for attracting and retaining employees and allowing small businesses to compete with larger employees that sometimes have more what I'll call Cadillac or robust healthcare coverage. And it's, expanding access to ERISA plans is very important there for protecting employees. And of course, a lot of small business owners get their own healthcare coverage and for their families too through the business, as you know.
The Affordable Care Act has made employee ERISA unaffordable.
Yes, very true.
Companies it's cost is skyrocketing. When then President Obama promised that the price was coming down, they've made it impossible, and there needs to be something done there to make it more beneficial and more cost efficient for both employers and employees, some flexibility. What role does the Employee Retirement Income Security Act play in helping small businesses offer robust and affordable health benefits to employees? And what should this committee do to better help small businesses offer high-quality coverage?
Thank you for that question. So ERISA is really the foundation for employer-sponsored health insurance, and robust plans can come with a strong framework under ERISA, lowering costs and enabling, as I said, small business owners to compete. Options that small business owners tell us they are looking for, being able to band together to form association health plans, other pooling arrangements that some states allow there, protecting self-insurance through stop-loss insurance, and reducing red tape and unnecessary paperwork, and of course, increasing price transparency, which is a big thing NFIB has been pushing for probably now decades. The cost and availability of health care insurance is our #1 on our problems and priorities survey. It has been #1 now for decades.
Okay. Mrs. Maietta, the Biden-Harris administration's overregulation negatively affected American workers and job creators. Last Congress, my bill, the Employee Rights Act, or ERA, addressed various harmful Biden administration rules, including the independent contractor rule and joint employer rule. In his first term, President Trump's NLRB proposed a common-sense joint employer rule that provided clarity to franchises and franchises alike. How important it is for the Trump administration, current NLRB, to once again support a narrow joint employer rule that gives clarity to small businesses, either via regulatory action or through a permanent legislative fix?
Thank you for your question, Congressman Allen. AHLA was proud to support your bill, the Employee Rights Act. Codifying the traditional standard of joint employers is fundamental to our industry. Franchising is the backbone of the hotel industry. Half of our hotels are franchised hotels. 700,000 people work in franchise properties right now. That certainty is critical to ensuring that a business owner can make decisions about their own business. And the franchise model in our industry is unique because our small business owners own the building, they own the capital, and they directly employ the employees. And so it has led to a pathway of entrepreneurship. in this
Yes, I'm out of time, but let me just add that the only way to get out of this fiscal crisis is to grow private jobs. That grows GDP, grow small businesses.
I
and
thank
we
the
can do
gentleman.
that. And I yield back.
Time has expired, and I will recognize the gentlelady from North Carolina, Dr. Adams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to our witnesses, thank you for being here. Dr. Shierholz, the Wage and Hour Office in my district in North Carolina provides jobs and helps protect all of my constituents from harm. These are people who are committed to serving the community, to stop child labor and protecting their fellow workers from abuse. As far as I'm concerned, firings at Wage and Hour Division seems like a ploy to roll back the clock on child labor protections without consulting Congress. So what sort of information might be contained in the case file systems handled by wage and hour offices, and how sensitive is it?
Okay, many sensitive data sources and processes are housed at the Department of Labor. So, for example, because DOL administers all worker compensation claims for federal employees, it's responsible for all of those records, which includes highly sensitive personal information like medical, financial, and other personal information that's gathered in connection with all of those claims. The Trump administration is viciously and illegally going after federal workers. It is no wonder they want access to that information. DOL data also includes confidential information about those who have reported OSHA violations by their employers. Those workers make those reports under the promise that it will be kept confidential so that they are protected from retaliation. Disclosure of those records presents a huge risk to those workers, and it poses a risk to the department's enforcement efforts, particularly going forward, as workers will no longer come forward because they know that they cannot be promised
Okay, so
confidentiality.
let me move on. I have a few more questions. So in terms of what you're saying, the issues that might arise are problematic if a billionaire industrialist like Elon Musk has access to this information. Would you say yes?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
So what kind of impact would layoffs in this office have for workers and children in my district?
Layoffs, federal worker layoffs, it will reduce the services that those federal workers do, the public services, the crucial public services, food safety, research, health, all of those kinds of services will be hurt by this. And then particularly in a district with higher unemployment rates, it could, you fire workers, if there's not other jobs available for them, then it could reduce public spending and actually have a drag on the economy.
Okay, so OSHA appears to have complied with President Trump's executive orders by going through all of its guidance documents and materials looking for certain banned words like diverse, like gender, and deleting any documents with these words. So is this a good use of staff time, in your opinion?
It is not a good use of staff time. What it does, it serves to divert the staff from the true mission of their organization. So you spend time doing these other kinds of activities, and what you're not doing is developing and implementing policies that protect the safety and health of workers and enforcing existing workers' regulations.
So OSHA, is, as far as I'm concerned, is already understaffed, and so we're wasting OSHA's already limited capacity on banned word witch hunts, putting workers, people at safety, and would it put the workers at their safety at risk as well as their health?
That's exactly right.
Okay, so let me ask Ms. Milito. I noticed that in your testimony that you expressed concern over the proposed OSHA heat injury standard, and I was co-lead on a bill calling on OSHA to make a heat injury standard last Congress. I noticed in your testimony that you claimed the proposed rule is too burdensome. I think that those were your words. So let me ask you this. Is your position that the current situation, a situation where hundreds of workers die from heat illness, is more acceptable? And are you telling the committee that you think the deaths of hundreds of workers are acceptable? To me, that's an erroneous burden of providing workers cool water, shade, air conditioning. Those things outweighs the lives of hundreds of human beings. So was that your testimony?
That was not my testimony, no. Many employers have designed and take very seriously effective heat injury and illness prevention programs. They have them in SAFE. Small business owners, let me back up and say, small business owners live and die on the reputation of their business. They do not want to have employees get hurt. They certainly don't want to have a fatality at their business. That would kill, it would just kill the business. So they take very seriously their duty to keep employees safe.
Thank you.
And
I
as
was
such,
just reading
Gentlelady's
your
time has
testimony, and I
expired.
am out of time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentlelady. Now I recognize the vice chairman of this committee and the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Owens.
Thank you so much, Chairman Warmer. And first of all, for organizing this very timely hearing. There's no more important topic for us. This is one that's dear to my heart, by the way. If we're to grow our American middle class, we need to unleash the unlimited potential of the independent contractor. And by the way, for those who don't understand, this middle class is what defines our remarkable American culture. It's a culture that's founded on the freedom of dreaming big and taking risks with the knowledge that in America we can embrace the concept of second chances if we fail. I look forward to working with my colleagues on this committee to address never again allowing the DC bureaucrats to have the power to stand in the way of that promise. For the sake of transparency, after retirement from the NFL, I worked for over 25 years in the corporate sales. Every year during that time, I worked also for myself part-time as an independent contractor. I understand firsthand the passion of an entrepreneur to want to craft and control their own future and not leave it up to the whim of someone else. Ms. Maietta, in your written statement, you stated that franchising has proven to be one of the most successful drivers for entrepreneurship across the United States throughout our history. Can you discuss how franchising in the hotel industry has created opportunities for entrepreneurship, and how has it allowed Americans to become small business owners and live out their American dream?
Absolutely, and thank you for the question. I mean, the franchise model in our industry is the epitome of the American dream. Of the 64,000 hotel properties around the country, half of those are franchise properties. That is the very epitome of entrepreneurship and allowing people to own a property. And once they own one, we've seen many of my members own many, several or hundreds, and it has allowed them to be real job creators in this country. Small businesses and the franchise model in the hotel industry is really the economic engine of this country, and we want to do everything we can to help preserve that.
Thank you. How would these opportunities be harmed by the Biden National Labor Relations Board joint employer rule, which is an attack on these independent contractor status?
That's exactly right. The concern was very high in our industry about the joint employer rule under the Biden administration, adding more uncertainty and burdensome regulations to an already stressed small business owner exacerbates the challenges that they have day to day. And at the same time, if you think about the last year alone, operating costs have risen twice as fast as revenue. And so more uncertainty creates even greater stress for many owners who are questioning whether they can stay in business, and that's the last thing we want to see.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Milito, as many as 1/3 of American workers now earn at least part of their living through opportunities as independent contractors, such as freelancing and app-based work. This is happening despite the Biden administration issuing of a 2024 rule that will strip away from entrepreneurs their status as independent contractors. Now that we are entering the America First, innovative, entrepreneur first era, how can we ensure the federal government protects and supports independent workers?
Thank you for that question, Representative Owens, and thank you also for your support of the Main Street Tax Certainty Act. So the Biden administration's rule on the independent contractor was very biased, as you pointed out, to finding individuals classified employees. It was, the administration seemed to want everybody to be receiving a W-2. But as you've pointed out, Small businesses often business owners start out as an independent contractor. They may have just one client, and that's how they get going, and then they build their reputation, and they take on other clients there. Under the Biden rule, it would have been very difficult for an individual, say an IT person, who wants to go out and starts off with just one client, because the weight under the Biden rule would have been, you are really an employee of that, even though the individual may have been marketing and trying to get other clients there too. So it really would have threatened the flexibility of individuals to start out and start their own business there. And it also would have, of course, created a lot of liability for businesses that contracted with independent contractors there too, and discouraged that. So it was bad on both fronts.
Thanks a lot. I think one of the responsibilities as an educational workforce is that we need to teach the power of entrepreneurship, that this capitalism system we have is why we have the greatest country in the history of mankind, and that in every industry there's right sizing. We call it RIF. I've gone through that several times in the private market, so I think it's important that federal employees understand when we're too big, we need to make adjustments so that we get the best product possible. And there's a remarkable private sector out there waiting for people to come and work for them, big time. So thank you so much. Appreciate what you guys are doing, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Desaulniers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Shierholz, thank you so much for being here. I have two questions and a follow-up if we have time. You already alluded to the illegal actions by the current administration in regards to NLRB. So maybe you could tell us your perspective of how that undermines working people's ability to create a union and be able to fight for their rights by illegally terminating Board Member Wilcox.
Yes, thank you for that question. So workers whose employers who are violating their rights to organize will no longer get a fair decision when they bring their case to the Trump NLRB, because it is no longer an independent agency. President Trump fired member Wilcox because she had, and I am now quoting from the email she got announcing her retiring, because she had was unduly disfavoring the interests of employers. That means that anyone who serves on the Trump NLRB will know that in order to keep their job, they have to favor and vote and rule on the side of employers. Member Wilcox would actually have to be reappointed in order to restore the independence of the Trump NLRB.
So I want to ask you a question about some of the comments I'm hearing. It's sort of hard to imagine about research on trickle-down and Reaganomics and Milton Friedman's views. We've had plenty of time to analyze that. It doesn't work. People with a lot of capital investment keep the money. All you have to read is Piketty and the inevitability of people fighting back when wages are so disproportionately represented in GDP versus capital. Is there any research that shows that this, what referred to some of my colleagues as the innovation of completely free market, actually works? It doesn't work.
Nope, it doesn't. And it used to be like this sort of neoliberal approach really was what economists, and I'm an economist by training, what economists really thought was how, like it was a reasonable model for how the economy worked. But in the recent period, it's become empirical research has come out showing that is actually not the case. Trickle down does not work. And there's sort of a counterpart to that, the middle out or bottom up approach to the economy, where you get money in the hands of people who are the most likely to have no choice but to have to spend it. That generates economic activity, that generates goods and services. That's what's good for the economy.
And as somebody who met a payroll for hundreds, thousands of them as a small business owner, as a restaurant owner, I knew that from the California Restaurant Association, all the research we did, that for whether you're a franchisor or an independent owner of retail, middle-income people spend it and go out to eat, and it gets multiplied in the economy. I wanted to ask you about another vulnerable population and your background. The administration seems to have attack on both special needs and the disabled community. So Gerald Ford signed IDA to make sure that special needs kids, which has expanded, would get free public education so that they could go out and be in the workforce. We've made great strides in this country to get disabled individuals to be able to work and contribute, and they've contributed disproportionately, I would say, given their amazing ability for empathy. You have any any comments about that, both on the education side as a workforce development tool for this community, but also the actual employment of it and what the administration is doing to attack disabled people and what might happen if they close down the Department of Education.
Yeah, am I on? I am on. The Trump administration has been very clear that they do not care about discrimination against people with disabilities. Like, Trump openly and publicly mocked a reporter with a disability. That's the backdrop against which they are operating. The Trump administration has made it clear that not discriminating against workers with disabilities is just not something that employers need to deal with. They just do, like, it is just not a priority. That is something that employers just will be able to take a pass on during the Trump administration.
So how will he enforce all these laws that were signed by Republican presidents frequently?
That raises a very, very, very good question when we have these laws that are in place and we have an administration that has been clearly flagrantly going against them.
I got 30 seconds. Do you have anything to add on your own on any of the other comments or questions you've heard here?
Oh, there's so many.
I know. You've got 20
I
seconds.
I don't even know. So one thing, I'll just say one thing. So on the independent contractor thing, I just want to be clear that the Biden administration, what their independent contractor rule did was codify the independent contractor definition that had been in place for decades. It was the 2021, no. It was I won't even try to get the year right now, but it was the Trump rule that went backwards, that made it much more difficult for workers to get, or made much easier for workers to get
Thank you.
classified as independent.
The gentleman's time
did
has
very well.
I
expired.
just scored it, yeah.
I now recognize the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Rulli.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Maietta, you said in your testimony that nearly 800,000 workers in the hotel industry rely on tips. You even joined President Trump on stage supporting legislation to stop tax on tips. So whenever we have a subject, I try to think in my mind how I could apply this to normal, everyday people. And I'm fortunate, because I was raised in retail stores, that my family ran for over 100 years. So I was analyzing different customers that come in and how no tax on tips could affect them. So what I was thinking was, if you have a single mom who's raising several kids on her own, and she's a waitress and she's working hard, or she's working at the casino, and we all see the tip drawer, so like, whether you're actually giving tips to them personally or in a jar, however that works out, in my math, I'm thinking $150 to $200 extra a week. That could add up to $500, $600, $700 a month. And here are things that a single mom could do with that extra money in her pocket. She could actually perhaps maybe upgrade her car that keeps breaking down that she's getting her kids late to school with. Perhaps she can maybe take a vacation because she hasn't taken her kids to Disney ever. Perhaps she can even maybe find a better school. She could be in an urban situation where it could be limiting her kids' possibility for a future. There's so many wonderful things that could happen if we could get the cash in the hands of someone crucial like that. And when you think about it, that's why we're all here to support the blue-collar worker. No one, I don't think probably in this room really cares about the billionaires. We care about the average day Joe bag of donuts that's working their heart out and barely making ends meet. So when you think about something like tax on tips, and we know that President Trump was the first one to come up with this idea, can you perhaps talk a little bit about how this could not only affect that single mom that's trying to raise her kid, but other parts of the industry? How deep would this tax on tips break really be for the blue-collar worker? Thank you.
Absolutely, and thank you for that question. I was proud to represent the hotel industry with President Trump at that event. No tax on tips would benefit some 800,000 individuals in the hotel industry, and so we're proud to work with Congress to ensure that all the job classifications in our industry that benefit from tips, whether it's the valet or the bellhop or the housekeeper or the bartender, are part of the rule that's being advanced in Congress right now. It's so important for individuals to take home more of what they earn every day, and that's why we are supportive of that proposal.
I love that. And could you maybe go into a little bit of a deeper dive when you think about the employee and the owner relationship? So like anyone that is a small business owner, and I think we know a lot of the hotels in my district in particular, you have people that actually started in that industry and saved up, and perhaps whoever owned the hotel before them decided to retire. So I know even as a small business owner, a lot of times if there's not a structure within your own personal family, you would look to someone that was running the business for you to pass that small independent business off to. So when you look at that relationship and you look at probably the number one problem that an employer has or a hotel owner would have would be employee retention. And we all know that that is such a crucial part of existing as a small business owner, employee retention, because just the cost to get a new employee and to train that employee, while another employee that's at full throttle has to pull back just to make that happen. Does this no tax on tips actually help with employee retention if you're a small business owner trying to get ahead?
We believe it will. I mean, retention is something that keeps our hoteliers up at night because, of course, it's such a competitive labor market right now. But our industry provides a pathway for opportunity. And so in addition to no tax on tips, our hoteliers are continuously providing upskilling and new trainings and the ability for certification so that they can get ahead. 50% of general managers today started out in entry-level positions. So the ability to go from an entry-level position all the way through and rise up to become a general manager or even own your own hotel is the very epitome of the American dream.
Real quick, can you leave us with what is the thought within the industry? Are people excited about this no tax on tips? Is it an exciting thought?
I can tell you that when I was at the rally, the hotel employees who were there were incredibly excited that they get to take home more of what they earn every day.
We really appreciate your time, and with that, Chair, I yield my time.
I thank the gentleman. I recognize the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Norcross.
Thank you, Chairman, and thanks for bringing this subject up. Unleashing America's workforce, I think, is a great topic that we're all focused on. And I love the idea of no tax on tips. I've been working on it for 2 years, and I'm glad the President's joining me. We have to be very careful here that the abuses don't come in with it, that all of a sudden you're changing a salary structure and making it, oh, we'll call it a tip so you can be tax-free. The real potential for abuse here, is it cash? Is it electronic? How do you report it? But the concept for the working schmucks of the world, give them a break. We give enough breaks to the billionaires. Help out the little guys. So we're all in, and hopefully he'll do this. He also talked about no tax on overtime. And now they want to eliminate overtime. So I'm trying to figure out what's going here. I'm a little confused. You know, a fair day's pay for a fair day's work. 40 hours has been the backbone. If you work more than 40 hours, then you're paid overtime. I think it's a concept that we can all deal with. You want to be home, but if they need you more, they pay you more. Yet we're trying to roll that back, and this is the stunning part for me, and I have great respect for people who serve in this institution. They're fighting to pay people less. They want to take away overtime. It's just stunning that we can't work together on this issue so that everybody makes out. Because when you don't make it overtime, the employer's doing better. It's not the worker. So certainly something that I want to work with the other side. The ERISA issue, the biggest tax break to have the employer pay for the health insurance is no taxes. Holy smoke, that's the greatest deal we ever gave the employer, because salary comes first, time off, I'll change that, paid time off is what they're looking for. And then the third one is health care. Well, health care would be even more difficult if we didn't have the ERISA and what comes with that. So the idea that we give a tax break for employers and employees under ERISA to get health care is an excellent idea. I just want to finish up by asking Dr. a question. There's a bill out there to eliminate OSHA. I don't know how many people in this room have been on a job when somebody's killed, but I will tell you, you will never forget it. Unfortunately, it happened twice in my career. Did somebody get killed right in front of you? And you know what stops that? OSHA. The deaths on the job today compared to where they were 50 years ago have changed night and day. And yes, there's a little bit of work involved in it. But to save somebody's life, to save somebody from being injured, OSHA stands between that and somebody who doesn't have the expertise because they're a one-man or a two-man show. The idea that OSHA will now put out the heat rule is just common sense for anybody that's been there. It's not to be punitive, it's to save lives. So, Doctor, talk to me about OSHA. Have we saved lives?
Yes, OSHA regulations, they are what, take a look at workplaces and see what are the broad safety and health concerns that we have, that workers have, and do smart regulations with net benefits that will protect America's workers. It saves workers from getting injured, it saves workers from getting sick on the job, it saves workers from dying on the job. And then, so it's not just the regulations, it's also strong enforcement that needs to, I mean, what we know is that a regulation is only as strong as its enforcement. So we also need strong enforcement to make sure that
So let's be clear. When you start to cut the Department of Labor and it goes in OSHA, it's already decades if they average out how often OSHA gets out to inspect a job.
Yeah.
They're not there to hurt them. They're there to save lives. So next time you think about getting rid of it, think about somebody not going home to their children because they were killed on the job. And I'll yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I recognize the gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Miller.
First of all, Dr. Shierholz, earlier in this hearing, you said, quote, "The federal workforce is tiny." I think the American people would disagree with you and find that laughable. I don't know what you're basing it on. The federal workforce is 2.4 million people, and that excludes the military and postal workers. Such an out-of-touch comment. And to my fellow member on the other side, you just said that we need to give the working schmucks of the world a break. I hope you didn't really mean it, but a schmuck is a foolish, stupid, dummy, sucker, loser. Okay, it's time for the government to be transparent and accountable. That's what the American people want. We want businesses and workers want less regulation and lower taxes. So now, Executive Director Milito, is it true that small business optimism has surged since President Trump has been elected?
It's very true, and the Trump effect is real. I will tell you that. It surged, in 2018 too. And as I said before, small business owners are anxious for President Trump to get started on this regulatory rollback there.
That's great.
As the chairman said in his opening statement, President Biden's policies hampered job creation. We've talked about some of those rules here today too. So yes, my members are very happy and are looking forward to, blue skies ahead.
That's great. And can you be specific on why that's the case? How would you define a pro-business environment that President Trump is implementing that's causing the surge in optimism?
Well, first, I think business owners are very happy to know that, they've heard President Trump's talk about the small business tax deduction, and Representative Miller, I want to thank you for your support also on that front too. So preservation of those tax cuts, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and I will take issue too with Dr. Shierholz's characterization of the tax cuts as for billionaires and corporations, because my members would most definitely disagree with that. That 20% small business deduction has been critical for so many small businesses, and they have used that to reinvest, not just in the business to buy new equipment, but I have stories where they've used it to pay for health care, 100%. They've used it to bonuses. They've used it to pay for, community things, sponsor the Little League things like that. Again, they use that money to reinvest in the business, in employees, and in their communities. So that they're very excited.
That's great. We join the excitement as we set the government back, reducing the government, making it more transparent and accountable like the American people want. Ms. Maietta, in your testimony, you state the hotel industry has a proven track record of creating not simply jobs, but pathways for sustained and rewarding careers. Can you speak more about the potential for upward mobility for workers in the hotel industry?
Absolutely, and thank you for the question, Ms. Congressman Miller. There is so much opportunity in the industry. 80% of entry-level employees get promoted within the first year. 50% of our general managers started in entry-level positions. On top of that, our AHLA Foundation has invested some $44 million back into the industry through retention and recruitment programs, allowing us to help our industry identify new groups of young people, individuals through our Empowering Youth program that attracts young people who are out of a job or out of work for training to get jobs in the industry. When you're in the industry, we work with the Department of Labor on an apprenticeship program that has seen a 90% completion over the last 5 years. And finally, we also provide, for the last several years, $1 million every year in scholarship funding to hospitality school students who are aspiring for jobs in the industry, and then for professional development scholarships for people who are already in the industry to get ahead and pay for certifications to get to that next level in their career.
Such great news. We're not tired of winning. Thank you, and I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady, and now I recognize the gentlelady from Georgia, Ms. McBeth.
Thank you so much, Chairman Wahlberg. Thank you to our witnesses that are here today. I have read your testimonies. Thank you to Ranking Member Scott, and thank you so very, very much, Dr. Shierholz. I'd like to ask you, is there anything that you would like to say in response to my colleagues' comments to you across the floor? Is there anything you want to say?
Yeah, the federal workforce is tiny, and I gave the benchmark for what I mean by tiny, and it is from Bureau of Labor Statistics data, including the Postal Service workers. The federal workforce makes up less than 2% of all payroll workers in this country. So it is just the idea that we're attacking this already extremely strapped workforce, it just doesn't make any sense.
Okay, thank you. Well, I would like to say that instead of taking action to address the cost of living crisis in this country, Republicans are trying to distract the American people from their plans to put Americans out of work, increase their taxes, and cut programs like SNAP and Medicare and Medicaid. Since taking office a little over a month ago, President Trump and Republicans in Congress have only made life more chaotic, more expensive, and more dangerous. President Trump's hand-picked Postmaster General just announced plans to resign after his proposed changes caused major delays and destroyed the American people's trust and confidence in the post office. They have pardoned and released violent felons and rabid anti-Semites back onto our streets, criminals that attacked police and were directly involved in the death of an officer who once protected the building that we sit in today, Brian Sicknick. They forced the head of the Federal Aviation Administration to resign, and just 10 days later, we had the deadliest air disaster in this country in almost 25 years. While this administration promised to bring down the cost of eggs, prices continue to skyrocket. Waffle House and Denny's have added a new surcharge on eggs, and instead of doing anything about it, the Trump administration chose to fire 10% of the staff at the Centers for Disease Control, which is in my home state of Georgia. They chose to fire doctors and researchers at the CDC, the National Institutes of Health, and the FDA, the very people who are directly involved with responding to outbreaks like bird flu. Time and time again, they say one thing, but they do another. And it's the American people who are paying the price at the grocery store, as well as with their lives. The American people deserve better. They deserve a government that is truly representative of their needs, not the wants and the needs of Elon Musk. If you really want to unleash America's workforce at this hearing that is entitled, give workers paid family leave. Let's make sure that they can take paid time off to have a child or to take care of an aging loved one or parent. Let's ensure that every American can have access to the skills that they need to get a good job that they can raise a family on without going into a lifetime of debt. We could reauthorize WIOA, update our federal job training programs, and finish the bipartisan work that former Chairwoman Fox, Ranking Member Scott, and this committee has been trying to get signed into laws since I came to Congress 6 years ago. Great work from members of both parties is being left unfinished in this committee and all over this Hill because of the single tweet from an unelected billionaire. That is wrong. That is not how our democracy is supposed to function. I look forward to a time when I can work with my colleagues on the other aisle, on the other side of this aisle, on issues that will truly make life better for the folks who are relying on us every single day to care for their interests. We do a great disservice to them when we hold hearings like this that disparage their ability to live life freely in this country as they deserve. And I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady. I recognize now the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Messmer.
Thank you, Chairman Wahlberg. Ms. Milito, in your written testimony, you state that the Trump administration should rescind or withdraw many of the burdensome rulemakings of the Biden administration. Does that include the heat, injury, and illness prevention in outdoor and indoor work settings rule?
Thank you for that question, Representative Messmer, and also thank you for your support of NFIB and for the Main Street Tax Certainty Act. Yes, NFIB requested that the department withdraw the proposed rule and proceed no further with the rulemaking. We certainly recognize that excessive heat can adversely affect the health of workers too, and I talked in response in an earlier question too, the length that small business owners go to ensure that their employees are protected and safe from all hazards, including heat hazard there. But not every misfortune in society necessarily calls for a burdensome federal regulation. I mean, that's the fact of the matter too. And OSHA is constrained by the statute under which it was created by Congress here, this body here. A broad public health hazard like heat is not an occupational hazard unless Congress opts to, change the statute. So there's no authority to regulate. Thank you.
Thank you. I plan on introducing legislation that would prevent this rule from ever being implemented since it exceeds OSHA's authority, does not meet the needs of small businesses, and fails to take into account differences between regional climates, job functions, and medical conditions of individuals. Do you consider this legislation the right step forward?
I absolutely do. Yes, NFIB does. And thank you for your efforts on that point.
Thank you. And the 199A small business deduction is probably one of the biggest provisions in the 2017 Tax Cut Act that we're going to try to extend. Would you classify your members as billionaires?
Absolutely not. No, they would not call themselves billionaires or rich corporations.
I would agree with that. Thank you. Ms. Maietta, the persistent workforce challenges that businesses face today is finding qualified workers and filling open positions. This challenge is particularly pronounced in the hotel industry where seasonal changes affect demand. How could apprenticeships help fill the gap and create a more resilient workforce for the hotel industry?
Thank you, Congressman, for that question. Apprenticeships have been a very important part of what our industry has done in the last 5 years. We've been working very successfully with the Department of Labor on that program and have added 3 different tracks that have seen some 1,200 individuals participate and go through the program and at the end get an increased wage. Of course, we would love to continue to work with the Department of Labor on helping to eliminate some of the burdens and barriers to entry for some of our members and to ensure that there's ongoing incentive funding that is a significant attraction for the employers, and changing some of the rule requirements and the reporting, which can be burdensome when you're also running a hotel.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Beach, in your written testimony, you note that the burden of regulation has grown significantly since 1980.
Yes.
Has this reduced economic growth?
It most definitely has.
You also stated that freezing new regulations for a decade would increase GDP by 1.8%. Could you go into some detail how that freeze would?
Well, yes, the freeze would increase output because it would allow investment to occur at a much greater level. In fact, the response that we got in our research from the investment variable, if you will, was much stronger than the output variable. Now, why would that be the case? Well, regulations are costs on businesses, and they have to allocate money to those employees which they hire to fill out forms and to comply with the business. When those costs come down, then they can allocate it, those dollars to more productive purposes. So that happens. Also, the price system is positively affected. We see a reduction in the CPI as goods to households cost less. Well, when goods to households cost less, that means that households can allocate funds to repairing that car that doesn't work, or to ordering that after school tutoring. So there are a lot of impacts that come from reducing regulation.
Thank you, and I yield back my time.
I thank the gentleman. I recognize the gentlelady from Connecticut, Mrs. Hayes.
Thank you, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. I think much of the testimony that we're hearing lacks context. The timeframes that you're citing occurred during COVID, when 1.2 million Americans died and our economy was deeply impacted. Ms. Maietta, like you, House Democrats were incredibly sympathetic to the hotel industry, which is why in the first CARES Act, where we expanded SBA loans, hotels took advantage of about $1 billion in funding. In fact, in 2020, the largest recipient of CARES Act funding was a Dallas-based hotel. So we understood the need to stabilize that industry. I'd also like to say, when we talk about small businesses, it is just not true to say that President Biden hampered job creation. And you don't have to listen to Democrats, listen to the data. The data tells the story of what has happened. Under President Biden, the economy added 16.2 million jobs. That's more jobs in 4 years than any president on record, and more jobs than any Republican president, whether they served 4 or 8 years. That's not Democrats, that's data. He also made history as the first president of the United States on record to not have a single month of seasonally adjusted job losses during his entire term. The federal government has awarded small businesses more than $183 billion in contracts, and 28% of all federal contracts go to small businesses. So we have tried to do our part to invest in this economy and help these industries. A lot of what I'm hearing today, we have some choices to make, and right now we are being faced with a $4.6 trillion in tax cuts. I heard you say that only about 30% of small businesses provide health care benefits. I'm sure that many of those employees who have children take advantage of programs like Medicaid, which many working people take advantage of. So that would be a huge detriment to employees in small businesses. You talk about, I've heard you say on 3 different occasions, the after-school and tutoring programs at the exact same time that this budget would cut Title I funding that provides for those programs to low-income students. Head Start would definitely be, slashing programs like Head Start would definitely hurt employees who are trying to work and have to make sure that their kids have child care. And on the topic of putting money back into the pockets of workers, we're dangling no tax on tips as if this is the answer to it. While I support no tax on tips, I'll tell you what else I support. Raising the federal minimum wage, which currently stands at $7.25 an hour. That's $2.90 a week, or $15,000 a year for an employee. I could tell you they could do a lot more for getting their car repaired or their child a uniform or after-school tutoring services if they were making $17 an hour or $680 a week, which is still only $35,000 a year. So if we really want to have a conversation about engaging the workforce, we would be talking about actually helping employees, making sure that we are spreading the wealth amongst everyone. The mission of the Department of Labor is actually to protect the employees, improve the welfare of the American workforce by promoting job opportunities, safe working conditions, and benefits. So OSHA and the protections that OSHA provides through the Department of Labor are doing exactly what they're supposed to, protecting employees. And I would argue that heat-related job conditions are a health hazard. They are a health hazard. I'm not really sure. I have a bunch of questions, but I don't even think it would make sense for me to ask these questions because I don't believe the witnesses are here to provide context or information. We've had hearing after hearing where the same people who appear at this table are at events at the White House and come here to promote the dangerous agenda of this administration. I am open to working with anybody on this committee to making sure that we are stimulating the economy and promoting small businesses, but also helping employees. So if we want to have no tax on tips, let's also raise the minimum wage. If we want to provide benefits to people, let's make sure that we're not cutting Medicaid and dental services and community health care programs for children, for the elderly, for many working people who still make below the poverty line and have to depend on these programs. I'm here for all of those things. I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady. Now I recognize the gentleman from New York, Mr. Mannion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. Dr. Shierholz, a couple questions. Thank you, I'm over here, yes. If a complaint comes before the National Labor Relations Board, this is one of their functions, what happens at that point?
Yeah, this is a really important thing. I think it's not really well understood. One thing is individual citizens do not have a private right of action as it relates to the National Labor Relations Act. So if their employer is getting in the way of them being able to organize, breaking the law, they can't actually hire a lawyer and go out and sue that employer. They cannot do that. The NLRB is the only game in town if they want to get a fair hearing about. So that is what the NLRB is for. It's there to adjudicate whether one of the things it does is to adjudicate when there's issues related to that, like if an employee feels like their employer has violated their right to organize, that's one of the places the NLRB steps in.
Thank you so much. Are there any outstanding complaints before the NLRB related to Elon Musk's holdings or any companies that he runs?
Yes, Elon Musk has been under investigation, either himself personally or for actions taken by the companies he owns, by multiple federal agencies from OSHA to SEC to the NLRB. The New York Times found that 11 federal agencies were looking into violations of companies owned by Musk, and surprise, surprise, there were also, those same agencies are also the ones being faced with DOJ actions.
And can a president remove a member of the NLRB without any process?
No, it needs a process. What the president did with Gwen Wilcox was an illegal firing. What it did was take away the independence of the NLRB by saying that she was unduly favoring the rights of employers. It just made it very clear to the rest of the people on the NLRB that if they want to keep their jobs, they need to rule on the side of employers. It's no longer independent.
And the NLRB members serve a 5-year term. Is it intentional why that is a 5-year term?
Yeah, it's supposed to be a case where it is an independent agency. It is not, if a Democrat is there, it actually can go over into a Republican president's term as an independent agency, but President Trump has undone that.
Thank you so much. Dr. Beach, you were the commissioner of the Bureau of Labor Statistics.
That's correct.
And I appreciate your service to this country. And how long was your term?
For 4 years.
4 years. And those terms generally move from one potential administration to another with their timing. Is that correct?
Yes, 4 years, but I served at the pleasure of both presidents. They could have dismissed me at any time.
Thank you. And if they had chosen to dismiss you, would there have been a process that would have had to have been followed, or could they have just indiscriminately let you go?
As far as I know, the process would be packing up some boxes and leaving the office.
I believe that the process would require, just like your approval in that position of commissioner, approval, advice, and consent of the Senate, it would also require advice and consent of the Senate for removal congressional authority. Yeah. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
I thank the gentleman. I recognize the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Under.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to all the witnesses who came here today. The 2020 CARES Act, with enhanced unemployment benefits, cost $900 billion over a year and a half, followed by then the 2021 Appropriations Act, and then ARPA, of course, has, in addition to generating extraordinary inflationary pressures that our American economy, businesses, and individual Americans struggle under today, in addition to that, it resulted in a decrease in workforce participation. The ranking member was bragging about so-called job creation under the Biden administration, and yet workforce participation is at a historic low. We have 7.6 million unfilled jobs. And I would note that 60% of all job creation since 2021 has been recovery of job loss during the pandemic, not new job creation. And I would further note that 22% of all new jobs created in 2024 were government jobs, not jobs in the private sector. And finally, that in 2024, the last year of the Biden administration, the average inflation rate was 4%, compared to the Trump pre-COVID inflation rate, unemployment rate of 3.5%. You know, we talk a lot when we're in this committee. We talk a lot about skilled workforce training, career and technical education, but a lot of this job loss has been in entry-level jobs, the kind of jobs one might take in small business franchises, in the hospitality industry, in the hotel industry. And could you comment, Ms. Pronounce your name for me, I apologize.
Maietta.
Maietta, could you comment about the effect of that loss of entry-level workers? Because I think I was once in an interview, a hostile interview. He said, well, you Republicans want everyone to be punching a clock. And I said, well, my first 3 jobs were I punched a clock. Are you demeaning the value of that? And I think this loss of entry-level workers in our economy has been devastating. Would you care to comment on that?
Absolutely. Thank you, Congressman, for the question. You know, as I said earlier in my testimony, the hotel industry is down some 200,000 jobs since the pandemic. It has been increasingly difficult to fill those positions. We have tried to be as competitive as possible by raising wages 15% faster than the national average, expanding our benefits, making sure that, you know, some members have started to implement sign-on bonuses, offering transportation credits, health care for part-time employees, discounts and perks, and yet we are still seeing difficulty in hiring and competing with, you know, big box retail that has millions of dollars to invest in advertising. A lot of our small businesses simply can't compete with that. One thing that is critically important for our industry is the H-2B legal guest worker program. So many of my members rely on that to fill especially peak and seasonal jobs. Some of my members are actually in town today to meet with your colleagues here on the Hill from the resort and independent community. And one member was telling me that he has a resort on a small island that inhabits 500 people, including babies. And at peak season, he employs 5,000 people. Without the H-2B program, he would simply not be able to function.
Sure. Thank you. And yeah, Mr. Beach, you made a number of points about macroeconomics. Would you care to comment? Yes.
Well, I'd like to comment on this last point.
Sure.
One of the casualties of increasing costs on low-income households is the increasing inability of those households or those individuals to travel to another part of the country to take a job.
Yes.
So by increasing these costs, by slowing down wage growth, we're actually locking people into places where there may not be jobs. And I think that's one of the things that we need to be increasingly attuned to.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I would just make the additional point that even though wages, and you mentioned 15% higher than the national average in your own industry, these increases in wages have not kept pace even then with inflation, which has been devastating, which is why it's so critical that we end the inflationary policies of the Biden
thank the gentleman.
administration. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
I recognize the gentlelady from the Keystone State, Ms. Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just think that we're beyond the point of accepting and regurgitating any propaganda or acting like we're in normal times. My Republican colleagues say they want to unleash America's workforce, but actions speak louder than words. If you really want to know where they stand, don't just listen to what they say. Look at what they're doing. As we sit here in this committee, we're witnessing the Republican administration dismantle the federal workforce in real time. There have been legally questionable buyout offers, funding freezes, stop work orders. More than 30,000 workers have been laid off indiscriminately. The administration has been demonizing federal employees, convincing the public that government workers are somehow the enemy, as all part of a major grift. The architects designing these policies aren't everyday workers, and you need to know that. They're billionaires and corporate executives. They're members of the ultra elite who extract wealth, resources, and labor from working class communities. These are the folks who stand to gain from slashing wages, gutting public services, and hoarding wealth. And that's exactly what they're doing. Last night, House Republicans voted to adopt a budget blueprint that would hand out $4.5 trillion in massive tax cuts for the ultra-wealthy, paid for by cutting vital programs that keep working families afloat: Medicaid, SNAP, Head Start. More than 38 million people across the country, including 3 million people in the Keystone State, rely on Medicaid and CHIP for their health care. Dr. Shierholz, how will America's workforce be unleashed, as my colleagues say, by Republicans' budget, which provides more than $4.5 trillion in tax breaks to billionaires and big corporations?
Oh, I am on. Okay, yeah, this unleashing is not going to happen because of this House budget. The draconian cuts to health care and food assistance for children and families will hurt millions of workers. That is not an unleashing. It will weaken our economy. Those cuts, as you said, they're being made to make fiscal space for tax cuts that will go overwhelmingly to this country's wealthiest households, just like the TCJA did. Like just to put some numbers on this, the TCJA, it will give the top 1% in 2025, the top 1% will get $60,000 in tax cuts as a result of the TCJA. The middle class, less than $1,000. The lower class, less than $100. It is just overwhelmingly favoring the wealthy.
Thank you, Doctor. So just to be clear, do you believe that these tax breaks will decrease the income, the wealth inequality, or increase it?
It will unambiguously increase it. When you put the tax breaks that overwhelmingly favor the very, very wealthy, combined with the tax cuts that reduce the incomes of the most vulnerable households, it is literally taking food out of the mouths of poor children. I mean, not literally, but to line the pockets of the very wealthiest households in this country.
Thank you. The truth is, Republicans don't want to unleash the workforce. They want to destroy it and replace it with an economy that only works for the wealthy. And that's proven further by the administration's actions to undermine civil rights protections across the workforce. Over the summer, President Trump went viral talking about black jobs. But one of the first acts as president was to rescind federal anti-discrimination hiring rules and eliminate funding for workplace diversity programs. Black Americans make up approximately 20% of the federal workforce because so many of us grew up knowing the value of securing what we called good government jobs. These jobs aren't just stable and provide fair pay. They've long been a pathway to overcoming discrimination in the private sector and to begin building economic security. By attacking both the federal workforce and civil rights protections, the Trump administration is actively reversing the progress, not just for black workers, but for all workers across the country who have made it in the fight for economic equality. Dr. Shierholz, is discrimination against workers good for the economy?
It is, okay, you know that is whether it's good for the broader economy is not the key metric that I care about when it comes to discrimination, but no, it is not good for the economy. One of the ways it holds back in the economy is by not letting people realize their full potential. It reduces productivity and is a drag on growth.
Thank you. You know what they say, a high tide lifts all ships. To be mindful of time, I just want to say one more time, actions speak louder than words. Do not listen to what they're saying, see what they're doing. So to recap, Republicans aren't trying to unleash anything. They're dismantling it, destabilizing working families, and concentrating even more power in the hands of billionaires and corporations who have a vested interest in undermining worker power, cutting critical programs, upending vital projects. A strong workforce is the foundation of a strong economy, but their policies are making jobs less stable, wages lower, and opportunities scarcer for all people, especially marginalized people. We cannot afford to let it go unchecked. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentlelady's time has expired. Thank you. I now recognize the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Grothman.
Thank you. We're going to lead off with Ms. Maietta. In your testimony, you discussed the importance of the hotel and lodging industry, the importance of recruiting and retaining a qualified workforce. You also mentioned the importance of Congress's work to reform the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act to better connect employers to the workforce system. Why is it important that workers have multiple pathways into the workforce and multiple avenues for advancement?
Yes, thank you, Congressman. Pathways into our industry are incredibly important, especially at a time when it's such a competitive and tight labor market, and we are short-staffed. 2/3 of my members report being short-staffed, particularly in entry-level jobs, so creating those pathways continues to be an important part, and we are happy to work with this Congress and this committee on reforms to WIOA.
Right. Good. Now I have a general question. We just heard a little bit about people not advancing and income inequity. And when I talk to my employers, as well as knowing some people in their personal life, we really hate it when people move up the ladder in this country because we have all these programs, low-income housing, earned income tax credit, Medicaid, food share, that if you make too much money, we take the programs away from you. It's like we don't want anybody making more than $16,000 or $17,000 a year in this country. And as the result, people, I think, are kind of stuck because you talk to employers and they say, my employees are turning down raises. They don't want overtime because they're going to lose their government benefits. Do you guys find this a problem? Or they got to look for cash work, which is probably not advisable, but it's the only way they can make more money because the government whacks them over the head with these government programs. We bribe them not to work too hard. Is this a problem you guys find in your businesses?
I can address this first. I mean, I'm looking here at NFIB's data that came in from January too. 35% of all owners reported job openings they could not fill in the current period. So
well, yes, but do you get, this is what I'm getting,
yeah.
And I get it all over my district. You get people working, they can't work more than maybe 16 or 17 hours a week. They can't accept a raise because all these government programs, we give you like almost a free apartment, a nice free apartment, and then if you make more than 16 or 18,000 bucks a year, they begin to force you to pay, normal rent. So in essence, we are contributing to this income gap by telling so many people in the country, don't work harder, we're going to take away your government benefits.
We certainly saw that in the 2021 period. I was working both in the Trump administration and Biden administration on just what were the disincentive effects of what we had just passed with good intentions. And there's evidence out there that well-intended programs can discourage work effort. I want to tell you this one thing, though. Everybody has seen the program of less regulation and less taxes already, and that was the period from 2017 through 2019, when households across the income spectrum saw significant gains, and African-American households saw gains they hadn't seen in 50 years. So we have seen this before, and we know what will happen if this program is properly executed. But disincentive effects do occur.
Well, all you got to do is talk to people. I think sometimes the problem with some of these congressmen is they don't talk to anybody but the lobbyists. If you get out in the real world, you will again and again find stories of employees who have to turn down extra hours, they have to turn down raises, they can't move up the income ladder because of the stupid programs are so generous that they in essence, you're stuck in there for life. And the other thing is you can't get married, that's another matter, where you're gonna lose your bennies. So I think we had a big problem starting with Lyndon Johnson, where they began to put in huge programs and you lose your bennies if you work too hard. And the message we're sending to people is, don't work very hard. And I mean, I'm sure in the hotel and lodging industry that's true. It's true anywhere where you have people making in that $15 to $20 range, where you can easily push yourself to the point where you lose your low-income housing.
I would say that what you're talking about is cliffs in benefit programs, where you get one more dollar and then you lose your benefits. What the answer to that then is to work with those programs to make them less cliffy. Don't address that there. Don't try to take away the generosity of the programs because they're providing.
Gentleman's time has
important
expired. Now we move on to the gentleman from Connecticut, Mr. Courtney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. I have to say, I think there's really an amazing disconnect listening to the majority's sort of narrative today about ways to strengthen the economy, when at the very moment that we're sitting here, we're seeing lots of warning flags about the fact that the economy actually is going in a very negative direction very quickly. This morning's Telegraph out of London has a story, economists are starting to worry about a serious Trump recession. The Consumer Confidence Index, which was just released a couple days ago, again, had its biggest monthly decline since August 2021 as inflation fears take hold. And again, if you read these articles and stories, it's because of the Trump tariff regime that is driving, again, this uncertainty and really hesitancy that is going to really, I think, haunt the economy in very, very short period of time. Again, the layoffs, which Ms. Lee talked about, is adding to, I think, the negative downward pressure that's happening to the economy. Again, I represent a district with a large military base. We're going to have thousands of DOD layoffs. We have a fire station, firefighter station on submarine base. They have 6 out of the 14 employees there are probationary, which again is the DOJ target cohort that's there. And again, regardless of the fact that fires on Navy ships is a really bad thing, that does not come into the equation of this Trump policy that, again, is just indiscriminately reducing the workforce, and at the same time, the tariff policy is driving up prices. And that's not just me saying that. Reuters had a story, again, just a couple days ago about U.S. manufacturers see high metal prices as tariffs near. Steel prices have gone up 20% since the election. That's not happening in Europe. It's not happening in China. It's happening, again, because the market is reacting to what they hear from the White House. And the president said it yesterday, that the tariffs against Canada and Mexico are back on the table, which again, his month delay is now running out. the steel and aluminum tariffs, which again are all across the globe, are again driving up one of the basic commodities in our economy. And the National Association of Home Builders, which is hardly a Democratic base organization, has been raising the warning flags. The American Farm Bureau has been raising the warning flags about the fact that fertilizer costs are going to go up because of a tariff on Canada. Again, 25% addition to fertilizer costs, which most of it is imported from Canada, is the reason why the American Farm Bureau is begging the administration and Congress to not let these tariffs go into effect. So Dr. Shierholz, from a macroeconomic standpoint, when you see policies that are driving up costs very quickly in real time as we're sitting here today, and again, layoffs that are happening at the same time, I mean, that sounds like a formula for stagflation.
Yep, it's worrisome. So I would not be an economist who studies the incoming data all the time without saying, I want to give it a little bit more time to make sure that it's not a blip. We want to make sure that there is a trend, but you're absolutely right that things are starting to flash concerns, and I think it has a ton to do with things like this very chaotic, unstable policy that's coming out of the administration. It is like nothing we've ever seen before.
And again, if we're talking about helping America's workforce, we need to get this stability and get the uncertainty that is, again, being driven every single morning in the news in terms of what's coming out of the White House. Mr. Chairman, I, again, would ask that the Daily Telegraph article, economists are starting to worry about a serious Trump recession. The Reuters article, USS manufacturers see higher metal prices as tariffs near. And CNN consumer confidence registers the biggest monthly decline since August 2021 as inflation fears take hold, admitted for the record.
Without objection, hearing none.
I yield back my time.
I thank the gentleman. I recognize the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Harris.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of you on the panel. And I apologize for folks coming in and out, but a number of other committee meetings and markups are taking place. But I did have the pleasure of reading your testimonies and looking over them. And I did want to ask you something, Dr. Beach. Your written testimony makes it clear that overregulation is hurting American businesses and workers. In fact, you made a statement, regulations function as a hidden tax, siphoning resources away from productive use. Businesses must redirect capital toward compliance instead of expanding current operations and researching new technological breakthroughs. During the first Trump administration, the president's focus on deregulation efforts benefited workers. Why was this effort so beneficial, in your opinion?
I think it stimulated investment, and the investment caused a greater pool. Investment dollars are out there in the banking system. They're out there in private companies to invest in expansion of their companies and also to start new companies. We see, the real key here is whether or not the free enterprise system is creating new businesses. That's the metric you should look at, not big businesses, but the small ones. From the sub-chapter S corporations to the proprietor. And I think that's one of the major things that happen. And of course, when that happens, when workers have new equipment, new businesses to work, they're more productive. And when productivity rises, then their wages rise. And we saw almost an immediate effect. But you don't have to go back to the Trump administration to see that. You can see that in the Clinton administration. You can see that in the Carter administration. In fact, every time we've had a significant deregulatory wave, we have seen a boost in economic output, a boost in inflation, a decrease in prices. And there's no reason why we shouldn't see that. Now, of course, you got to make sure the regulations that you reduce are not going to put people in safety issues, right? And you have to be smart about it. But there are just billions of regulations out there that don't qualify in that category. So that's the effect we would expect.
Well, and I think that's an excellent point. And I guess I would ask as a follow-up to that, when you think about what took place during that first term, and then you referenced previous administrations, how would you say the president, how can he improve the economic conditions and support workers and businesses during the second term now that he's underway?
Well, I think he has a more aggressive program. That's the first thing. So you have to combine not raising taxes. That's the first thing. You can't do that. You have to, regardless of what you think about this act, that has to be made permanent. And the 199A is a big provision for small businesses. Do that, and then he has a 10-to-1 reduction plan. That would be way more than what he had done in the first administration. And we're expecting some big effects. My research shows that we get big output and big gains in investment and big gains in hours worked. There'll be plenty of overtime. Let me tell you, we talked about overtime before. There'll be plenty of overtime once this program's in full swing.
Gotcha.
And if I could just say one more thing about the federal workforce. We don't really have to speculate a lot about what will happen to the federal workforce. You know, this isn't the first time that this has happened. I'm old enough to remember, and perhaps you are as well, the Reinventing Government program of the Clinton-Gore administration. That was the first time that people got letters and some emails saying, would you like to resign? That was the first time. And there was massive decreases in the federal workforce. And what happened after that was a period of, I think every Democrat would say, of unprecedented growth, and we even balanced the budget by the end of that term. So I don't know whether that's going to happen this time. No one knows, but there is a record out there that we can look at.
Well, in the final minute we have left, I believe rather than promote the proven policies that you've talked about that unleash the economy, like lower taxes and deregulation, things that help businesses and increase wages for workers, my colleagues oftentimes on the other side would rather increase individuals' dependence on the state through ever-expanding welfare. I will ask you just in the closing few moments we have, outside of the massive federal expansion of unemployment insurance for over a year and a half during COVID, could you just quickly discuss what federal programs or policies incentivize unemployment?
Incentivize unemployment, that's a great concept. Well, I think if you have extended unemployment benefits, the evidence shows that people do stay out of work until like the last week. So that extends it. We've talked here about putting in place excessive benefits that, particularly in the housing area, that might cause people to think, do I work that extra hour and lose my means-tested housing benefit? Those are well-intentioned programs. We just have to be really careful that we don't get unintended consequences.
Gotcha. Well, thank you so much. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I recognize my friend from the Great Lakes state of Great Michigan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And
Mrs. Stevens.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I am sitting next to another Lakes member of the Congress from Minnesota here. So, but we pride ourselves on our fresh water. Look, it's wonderful to have your expertise here. And there's some PhDs in economics. And we had a vote last night, kind of in the dark of the night. First we were voting. Then they said no vote on this budget resolution. Everyone left the Capitol. Then out of nowhere, they said, we're actually just kidding, we're going to vote. I mean, it was wild. Some of these reporters saying, covering the Congress for decades, they'd never seen anything like it. Now, the $880 billion cut to Medicaid is compelling me here regarding this topic of an exercised workforce. Because as an evangelizer of special education programs, fully funding the realized promise of IDEA and special education in the United States of America, I also think about the families in Oakland County, Michigan, who have children with medically complex conditions and scenarios. And I've heard this all over. They would be bankrupt. They'd be sold out the river without Medicaid. And so, Dr. Shierholz, maybe you could start here, because I'm just trying to think, when we have the lowest levels of unemployment, otherwise known as the highest levels of jobs in Detroit, Michigan, manufacturing town, in over 50 years. That happened 2 years ago. I told the president about it. I thought, this is exciting. This is a moment for us. But what does this mean if we're going to really make all these cuts to Medicaid? And what does that do to our workforce?
It's really, really bad for our workforce and for our most vulnerable families. And the other thing about Medicaid, in addition to the things that you were mentioning, is cutting Medicaid will have negative impacts, not just now, but literally for generations. There is very solid research that shows kids getting Medicaid as a kid, they have better outcomes, better income, better health, better educational attainment as grown-ups. So when you think about the idea that policy that is so unbelievably effective in helping our most vulnerable households, the idea that that is on the chopping block is just
And
mind-boggling.
these are working professionals, and we want these people. I mean, sometimes they get home health for that dependent, and I'm just thinking to the hotel and lodging, you're in this big race for, workers. But I'm just thinking, wouldn't that help you get more workers if people were, had their Medicaid?
Thank you, Congresswoman, for that question. Look, I can tell you that we offer competitive wages and expanded benefits, and at the same time, we are still 200,000 people down. So there are certainly a lot more pressures that exist in terms of attracting people into our industry.
Yeah, it's a shortage, and I just think about, look, I'm in my communities, and I think about these people, they want to go to work, and they got dependents, and they need the schools with the programs, and they need the access to health. And, Doc, you're also an economist. Haven't you read about this, that we need health care for the most vulnerable so that they can get to work? We got 200,000 open jobs. What's the impediment? Is it a workforce protection, or is it actually basic services that enable people to go and work?
Healthcare is absolutely essential for workers. That's true. And we're talking about Medicaid right now and cuts to Medicaid. I would encourage everyone on this committee to think about the billions of dollars in Medicaid missed payments that have been documented. The misallocation of funds to people who are not executing the program. And there's a lot we can do before we go into the Medicaid program where it affects individuals and their recipients of it.
Maybe I'll have a round table with some of these people who've been abusing Medicaid. I just have never met them. The only people I meet are the people who are working their tails off, trying to make ends meet. I don't know if you've ever walked into a union household, because I have. And this is not a shout back at you. I'm just saying, I meet these families, and they're incredible, and they want their kids to exercise their full potential. And you're right. I'll be honest, we do have to have a cleanup of waste, fraud, and abuse, but not at the expense of punishing a workforce when we got job openings and needs. These are our taxpayer dollars, and we're paying into a government as Americans that is owed to us, not gajillionaires who in the dark of the night are proposing things and not responsible conversation. And so I thank my chair for enabling me to use my 5 minutes as a lawmaker to start this conversation. I look forward to continuing to have it, and I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady, and I recognize the gentleman from Guam, Mr. Moylan.
Thank you, Chairman Weiberg and Ranking Member Scott. Thank you for hosting this important hearing on the American workforce. And I'm also glad to have Ms. Maietta here today representing AHLA. The hospitality and tourism industry supports thousands of Guam in my district, and it's vital to Guam's economy. I'm also glad to hear support for the H-2B visa program. Now, H-2B workers fill gaps in Guam's workforce and participate in the growing our economy tremendously and work to strengthen our national security at this critical time, inside and outside the military bases. So we must work to expand and extend the H-2B program and give businesses the tools they need to succeed. And likewise, the Tax Cuts Jobs Act provides important tax relief for our local businesses. We must reauthorize the Tax Cut Job Act and give our businesses and our workers the relief they need to thrive. Now, strong economics support American prosperity and the American dream. And simply put, the economic security is a national security. And that's important in the Indo-PACOM, specifically against our aggressors. And over the last 4 years, policies like the Biden administration show why doctors operate with scalpels and not hammers. Now, the one-size-fits-all rulemaking is not an option. I encourage the Trump administration and Congress to appreciate the unique circumstances in the territories in policymaking, please. And regulations like the overtime rule, it just unjustly affects my community and districts like mine. The Trump administration's commitment to working individually with states and territories is a meaningful improvement. I'm thankful for that. So my first question is for Ms. Milito. And you testified between 2021 and 2024, small businesses face $1.8 trillion in costs of complying with regulations. How might small businesses have otherwise used that money to invest in their workforce if they had not faced those burdens?
Thank you, Representative, for that question. So the hidden tax, as Dr. Beach mentioned, comes out to about $50,100 per employee, the hidden regulatory tax there. That's a lot of money, and a lot of money that small business owners could use on other things, investing in their business and investing in employees. So I'll give you an example. Money that could be used for bonuses at the end of the year, money that could be used to either purchase health insurance for the employees, or as I hear from many members, they're using, for instance, you mentioned that small business tax deduction, using that, and from regulatory savings too, using that to pay up to 100% of the employees' premiums for health care. So those are ways in which small business owners can take money either through regulatory savings or through the small business tax deduction and reinvest it back directly into their workforce.
Thank you, and it's much needed, especially my community in Guam, where our workforce is so small as we do this military buildup that we really need these additional workers to stay and be happy and not pay this, get overburdened with this. So it's critical for us that we have that. Thank you very much. My next question for Dr. Beach. In your testimony, you discussed the need for Congress to reduce regulatory burdens on American businesses. Please elaborate. Give me more on the need for Congress to avoid this one-size-fits-all approaches to business regulations.
Well, I think periodically Congress needs to go through all the regulatory matter and begin to think, well, are these needed now? There's outmoded regulations nobody would support. Get those off the books. And we found that when we worked at the state level, there's a lot of those out there. And then look at the regulations which are in place, which are designed to be cautious about certain aspects where we don't need to be that cautious anymore. We're in an information technology age now, and so record keeping and other elements need to be changed. Always think about regulations that inhibit investment, inhibit the buying of new machines and putting off the old machines so that workers have the best things they can work with and be the most productive. So, that's not specific, but those are categories where I think Congress could really focus their attention on the regulatory matter. By the way, since the Lobelbright decision, that whole regulatory matter is coming back into your hands. And so this is going to be not a subject of academic interest, but a real practical interest for the members of this committee and others.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the panel. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I recognize my friend from California, Mr. Nakano.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dr. Shierholz, whenever I encounter doctors, they're always telling me and complaining about how low the Medicaid reimbursements are and just how few doctors actually even will take Medicaid patients. And my suspicion is that Medicaid is one of our leanest programs in health. This idea that was bandied about, that there's billions of dollars to be saved. What do you have to say about that?
So it is a large program. I'm not saying that there's zero waste, but you're absolutely right. It is an incredibly lean program. And what we know is there is certainly not $880 billion worth of waste, which is what the House budget is trying to cut from Medicaid. What that means is that there is no way that this will be cut without absolutely gutting benefits that go to households who really, really need it.
Thank you for that. So I too agree that in a program this big, there's some waste that we need to and inefficiencies, but on the whole, doctors are not getting rich off of this program, and it's not a Cadillac plan, right? And it helps children. A huge amount of children get helped, and children actually don't cost that much money. But it makes a huge difference to be able to serve those children and to serve the mothers of those children. I want to follow up on something that my colleague Dr. Allen suggested, that over 30,000 federal employees who were terminated, quote unquote, looking for a change in career, as he called it, simply apply for a new job in the private sector. Can you be more explicit about the dangers of gutting the professionals responsible for safety, quality control, enforcement standards, and much more across every sector.
Yep.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, definitely. I keep returning to this, but it's really important to say the federal workforce is already very, very small. It already has been shrunk. It is less than 2% of payroll employees. But they do so much to protect the safety of our food. It is because of the National Weather Service that we know when we need to evacuate, when there's a weather emergency, and on and on and on and on. And just the services of the federal government employees provide are just a backdrop to our lives and to the economy of this country. The idea that we can gut that without doing enormous harm to those services and to the stability of our economy is just a farce.
Well, look, supposedly the VA has created exemptions for certain essential folks who, and for the probationary employees that weren't fired who were essential, but I'm getting back, as the ranking member of the committee, stories about 2 individuals at the Cleveland Medical Center who did intake. I mean, not highly technical people, but they did intake for mental health care patients. And the fact that they were fired meant that it means right now it's wreaking havoc on mental health services for that VA. And this is being derided as, well, they can just go get a job in the private sector. But what people fail to recognize is that, as you said, the federal government is already lean. The federal workforce has already been shrunk over time. In fact, the VA and the health administration area, the VHA, is 40,000 understaffed. And that's why there are access issues at the VA. Can you also talk about the economic implications of layoffs of this magnitude?
Mentioning the VA, it also makes me, it's useful to point out that the federal government disproportionately employs veterans. And what we know right now is that veterans are facing incredible stress, returning from service and then facing layoffs right now. It's just an unbelievable slap in the face to people who have served our country.
So it's estimated that 6,000 veterans have been terminated from their jobs. That's the estimated amount. Not counted in that are the military spouses, who by their nature travel according to their spouse's duty station, and so they're perpetually a probationary employee. And we're caught up in this algorithm of everybody who's on a probation that it's harder to fire people who are more senior and who have tenure. But let's make a political show of just firing as many people as we can to show that we're cutting waste, fraud, and abuse. That whole premise is belied by the fact that they fired the inspector generals whose job it is to find waste, fraud, and abuse. I don't think they actually had any kind of a plan or any kind of an analysis to show where this waste, fraud, and abuse was. It looks like the evidence shows it's willy-nilly, indiscriminate firing of probationary employees. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I recognize the gentlelady from North Carolina, whose portrait hangs behind us.
Oh, I forgot about that.
Well, we didn't. And, we're glad it hangs there, and I recognize her for her testimony. Ms. Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that very much. And I want to thank the witnesses for being here today. Dr. Beach, in your testimony, you explained that cutting federal regulations could be as good or better than making tax cuts permanent. And we've actually heard this from business and industry. Yeah. Cutting taxes is extremely important for unleashing the American worker, but why do federal regulations have such an outsized impact on economic growth? And what sort of benefit would workers experience if both tax cuts and regulatory reform are made?
Well, the answer to that is that in the last 15 years, regulations have just grown tremendously. All the data shows a massive increase. These regulations are primarily in the financial sector. They're in areas affecting investment, in manufacturing, and in transportation. And they're not necessarily in the safety and health areas. They're in the compliance of this and that and so forth and so on. These all need to be reviewed. So when you reduce the regulatory burden, when it's that high, the effect is very large. Now, why is it larger than making the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act permanent? Well, you're just avoiding a tax increase here. So you're telling businesses, well, your taxes are not going to go up. Individuals, your taxes are not going to go up. And you may want to do a few things, overtime and, tax for tips and that sort of thing. That may be possible. But right now, the opportunity is on the regulatory side in terms of growth.
Thank you very much. In your capacity at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, were you able to determine why the growth of public service sector jobs accounts for such a large portion of the current job growth?
We saw a lot of increase in state and local education, in state higher education during the period 2021, 2022. There was growth in the federal workforce. There's no question about that. Even though it was, as my colleague says, a 2% of all payroll employment, that's still it's a pretty good percentage. So a lot of the growth is happening at the state and local level in the education area. That's what apparently was going on at that time. And it's tied, of course, to federal programs which had the intended effect of increasing employment in those sectors.
Thank you very much. Ms. Milito, what workforce issues did small businesses face during the previous administration that Congress has not addressed but should?
Thank you for that question, Representative Fox. So we are very hopeful that Congress will take action on something with the heat standard, and this was discussed earlier, legislation that would prohibit OSHA from ever touching a heat standard again. Again, that I want to correct something. I did not say that it was not a heat hazard is a health hazard, but it's not an occupational hazard. It's not an issue for OSHA to address there. So legislation that would prevent OSHA from passing a standard on that would be very important. And certainty, too, with withdrawing the Biden administration rules on overtime, the joint employer standard, which a court stopped there, but the independent contractor rule is still out there hanging in the courts around there, and we would like to see those wiped out too. So those are some areas where our members are looking for relief. And we have sent a letter, as of just yesterday actually, over to the White House asking for relief in these areas.
Well, I'm going to ask you a second question, but you may have answered some of this before I got here, but I'll ask you to follow up in writing. As the Trump administration takes aim at federal regulations, what concrete steps can Congress take to join with the administration and help ensure small businesses succeed? But I'm not going to ask you to answer that now. We'll submit that to you formally and ask for a response. Ms. Maietta, how would worker upskilling and education improve in your industry with a lighter federal regulatory burden?
Congresswoman, thank you for that question. It is so hard today to own and operate and run a small business in this country. We, in the hotel industry, are regulated at the local, state, and federal level. Increased regulatory burdens just add to increasing costs and implementation, new processes or systems that can then limit the ability to hire quickly or staff up or train and help your employees get ahead in the industry. So, measures like the NLRB joint employer rule or overtime rule would have severely impacted the industry and made it even harder to continue to operate in today's environment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady, and now I get to another member of the Great Lakes Caucus who knows the beauty of fresh water without sharks and salt. The representative from Minnesota, Ms. Omar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I find it truly astonishing that House Republicans have brought us here today to discuss ways to unleash America's workforce while they are actively abandoning workers. How exactly are we supposed to unleash anything when federal workers are being threatened by an unelected billionaire? When critical government services and authorized funds are being disturbed at a whim? When worker protection, basic safeguards against unsafe working conditions and employment discrimination are being undermined. We are already hearing reports that the Trump administration has begun firing many workers at the Department of Labor and the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health. Ranking Member Scott and I recently sent a letter to HHS demanding more information about these staffing cuts and grant distributions. We have not heard anything back yet. Dr. Shierholz, I want you to help us understand how these attacks on critical agencies will impact worker safety. What does it mean for workers if these agencies lose significant numbers of federal employees?
What OSHA does is protect workers' health and safety by passing laws, by passing regulations, publishing regulations, enforcing those regulations. When they have less personnel, they will be able to do that less effectively. America's workers will be less safe on the job, full stop. The Wage and Hour Division, for example, they enforce wage protections. They make sure, their workforce has already been shrunk dramatically, so their low-wage workers today lose tens of billions of dollars a year in the form of wage theft by their employers, employers not paying minimum wages that they are owed, not paying overtime that they are owed. We cut Wage and Hour Division, and that skyrockets even further. Workers will be hurt by actually being hurt on the job and by losing wages that they were legally owed.
Yeah. And who really benefits when agencies lose this capacity?
Okay. The people who benefit are bad apple employers. They benefit because they are able to cut corners on worker safety protections. They're able to cut corners on actually paying their workers. They just don't have as much oversight over what they do. So bad apple employers gain over workers. Bad apple employers gain over lawful employers because then they are in a competitive advantage over lawful employers. And then the other group that benefits from this are the wealthy who are going to be the disproportionate beneficiaries of the tax cuts that these kinds of agency cuts are going to help pay for.
Appreciate that. Thank you so much. And I have to say, these attacks will have, as you just said, real and devastating consequences for working people in this country. It's about thinking about economic mobility. It's about thinking about job security. It's, at minimum, thinking about institutional stability. And what we are witnessing that is taking place in this country really is something that I find very outrageous and shameful. And I'm glad that we are having this conversation. I hope that we get to have many of these conversations. And lastly, before I yield back my time, Mr. Milito, Ms. Milito, why do you believe workers suffering heat exhaustion is not a work hazard?
It is a public health hazard, and OSHA is limited by what the authority that Congress has delegated it. OSHA has authority to regulate and oversee occupational hazards.
Yeah, standards, right?
Occupational hazards.
Yes. And why would you not
water,
think it is
things like
not an
that.
occupational hazard if someone is being forced to work 8 hours under 120 degrees
And
without getting regular breaks?
And employers are already taking action to
So
protect
you believe
workers from
employers should have the responsibility to decide
have
who
a
dies and who
responsibility to-
survives in the heat?
They have a responsibility to keep their workers safe, most definitely, but that is separate and apart from
So you're
OSHA's
saying
authority.
those employers who have not done that, who have seen people die at their workplaces in places like Texas, it's just because they're bad people, and we shouldn't have the responsibility of protecting the workers, is what I hear.
That's not what I'm saying, but thank you.
I thank the gentlelady. I recognize now the gentleman from California, Mr. Kiley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the last Congress, this committee held the Biden administration accountable for its anti-worker agenda. And now that we've turned the page, we have an incredible opportunity to enable and facilitate the pro-worker, pro-small business, pro-growth policies that are coming from the new administration. But this committee's oversight proved particularly critical when President Biden made the baffling decision to elevate the state labor secretary with the very worst record in the country to be his Secretary of Labor. And our committee actually brought in Ms. Julie Su for a hearing at that time, where we were able to show how she was the Secretary of Labor for the state, California, that had the single highest rate of unemployment in the entire country in her tenure, first out of 50, had the lowest rate of wage growth in the entire country, 50 out of 50, and had the highest rate of real poverty in the country, first out of 50. And then that she also was the architect of the most disgraceful, notorious labor law in modern U.S. history, that being AB 5. Now, after she came in for a hearing here, the U.S. Senate refused to confirm her. Her nomination was stopped with bipartisan opposition. But of course, the Biden administration chose to lawlessly keep her at the helm of the Labor Department for the entire tenure of the administration. And in that position, she did indeed attempt to federalize the failed policies of California by implementing a new rule that was designed to mimic the effects of AB 5 in California as far as limiting the freedom of independent contractors. Now, the good news is that that regulation has not yet wreaked the sort of damage that we had anticipated, perhaps because of the illegitimacy of Ms. Su's tenure at the helm of the Labor Department, which shattered all records, by the way, for an acting unconfirmed secretary. But nevertheless, we still find ourselves in the situation where that regulation is on the books, where there continues to be uncertainty as far as the livelihoods of independent contractors, the ability of small businesses to work for them. So in order to resolve this issue, to provide certainty, to protect the rights of workers and countless enterprises across the country, I've introduced the Modern Worker Empowerment Act, which would specify that the classification standard for an independent contractor comes down to two intuitive factors. Number one being the degree of control of the hiring entity over the work performed, and the second being the opportunity for profit or loss, or the opportunities and risks inherent to entrepreneurship. This is a pretty common sense standard designed to say that if you truly are running your own enterprise, then you don't need to be forced into a W-2 classification. In addition to that, I've introduced the Modern Worker Security Act. So we have the Modern Worker Empowerment Act and the Modern Worker Security Act. This legislation is designed to encourage the use of portable benefits, which will provide a level of a social safety net for independent workers that they can take with them from job to job, things like health care and retirement savings. The problem in existing law is that if associations or companies or other groups choose to provide those benefits, then it's kind of like no good deed goes unpunished. You've had that then used by regulators to say, oh, look at that, you're providing benefits, you must be an employer. We're going to force this to be considered a W-2 arrangement, which is not what either party to the transaction wants. So it's had this chilling effect on the ability to offer portable benefits and for workers to have that measure of security. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to move both of those measures through this committee and provide more certainty to millions of folks across the country. I think this will have a tremendous impact on our workforce. And maybe with the remaining time, Ms. Milito, since you mentioned this, the labor regulation, the independent contractor regulation in your testimony, could you just give us a sense of how damaging this uncertainty has been for small businesses?
Yeah, it's created a lot of headaches for business owners who cannot determine whether or not somebody they've hired once a week to come in and do their website improvement needs to be, as you put it, a W-2 person, or because they also do website work for other businesses, can I pay them, as an independent contractor? Because they have their own business, they have their own business card there. The Empowerment Act that you have introduced would be very helpful on that front in codifying that simple, very simple two-factor test that the Trump rule had. So thank you for that.
Thank you. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I now recognize Mr. Kassar from Texas.
Thank you. We're 1 month into the Trump presidency, and American workers already have many fewer rights than they did just about a month ago. These attacks have been numerous, but I want to talk about what has been one of the biggest threats to workers so far, and that is Elon Musk and Donald Trump's effort to eliminate the National Labor Relations Board. The NLRB is an independent government organization that protects workers from being fired or discriminated against for collective bargaining. The NLRB was started in 1935 when members of Congress and the president came together and said that workers need more rights and that there needs to be a check on the power of the ultra-rich that caused the Great Depression. So if you try to organize a union at your workplace and your employer fires you, it is the NLRB that makes sure that you are protected. If you form a union and your employer refuses to bargain with you, it is the NLRB that holds those big corporations accountable. Without a strong NLRB, workers will face more challenges in fighting for higher pay, better benefits, and workplace safety. Musk and Trump know this because they know that if you can't bargain, then all you've got left is begging. That is why they are coming after unions. That is why they are coming after workers' ability to bargain together, because they want to be able to force workers at their companies to work for more hours, for less pay, with less safety, less rights, while keeping more money for their big billionaire donors and friends. Dr. Shierholz, is it correct that overall, workers that form a union and bargain receive higher pay and better benefits than those workers who do not unionize and bargain in the same industry?
Yes, it absolutely is. Careful, raw comparisons, careful, regression-adjusted comparison, it all shows that workers who are in unions make more than similar workers who are doing the same work, same demographic characteristics, who are not in unions. Can I take 1 minute that I'm dying to correct the record on about the independent contractor rule?
Go ahead, can you correct the record?
There's just been sort of outrageous things said about the independent contract rule. The independent contractor rule that the Biden administration did not mimic AB 5. It merely restored the method for determining classification that had been in place at Wage and Hour for decades. But Trump was the one that put in a rule that very much weakened it. Biden just restored back to the method that had been used for decades. Sorry to...
And so but it should be no surprise to us that Trump and Musk, who have private companies that generate them billions of dollars, want to have workers have fewer rights, have workers have to pay their own taxes rather than employers having to contribute, want workers to not be able to get overtime pay. They want those workers to not be able to form a union and bargain. That way, they can just get more and more money from workers and taxpayers and keep it for themselves. Last year, the NLRB cited Musk's company SpaceX for forcing workers to sign illegal severance agreements and for firing workers in retaliation for speaking critically of Musk. There's story after story, instance after instance of Musk trying to bust unions and not respect workers' basic rights that we won back in the 1930s. Instead of accepting those NLRB rulings, Elon tried to sue the NLRB out of existence, arguing in court that the organization created by Congress is unconstitutional. And now, after spending $277 million to get Trump into office, he's using his power in the White House to try to tear down the NLRB. One of the first things that Trump did was fire Gwen Wilcox, an NLRB board member who is independent. Trump is not allowed to have fired her, but without her, the board doesn't have enough members to function, making it so the NLRB cannot hand down rulings to protect workers. In summary, Mr. Chairman, Elon Musk and Donald Trump's agenda is not to make the government more efficient for workers. It's to make the government more efficient for themselves. And getting rid of the NLRB, attacking workers' rights that we've won in the 1930s, is the perfect example of how Trump and Musk are talking about how they're for working people, but what they're actually doing is screwing you over and taking your money for themselves. With that, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Now I recognize the representative from Pennsylvania, Mr. McKenzie.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to speak today at this wonderful hearing that we are hosting on unleashing America's workforce and strengthening our economy. I really can't think of a better topic for this committee to be discussing after a great hearing that we had on the American educational system, because one of the key things that I want to focus on as a member of Congress is what we can do to strengthen our workforce, promote economic growth, and support working families. Because all across this country, for the past number of years, families have been suffering with high prices from massive inflation. And we have a workforce challenge that so many people can't even get into the workforce because there are barriers for them. Childcare is too expensive. Many businesses aren't offering paid maternity leave. And so for a lot of workers, they are making a rational decision about whether they should be in the workforce or not. And it is purely economic. But they say, why would I go work 40 hours a week when the costs of having a child and raising a child make it unsustainable to be in that workforce or have any take-home pay left at the end of the day? And so those are the issues we need to focus on. And we need to focus on our workforce because far too often, people, when they want to talk about economic growth, they only talk about taxes, regulation, and trade. Those things are all hugely important, not dismissing those at all. But the fourth thing that we need to focus on is workforce. And that needs to be a part of every economic discussion, is workforce. If businesses don't have the proper and skilled workforce, there is no business operation that will be carried out. So I want to talk just very briefly about my opinions that I think we need to actually continue this trajectory that we have been on in this country about promoting career and technical education, promoting community colleges, two-year degrees, all of these things that for far too long were disparaged and everybody said you only should go to a four-year college if you want to be successful. We know that is not true, and so I think we need to speak that truth here in Congress and continue our mission to make sure that every student, every adult gets into a meaningful and rewarding career where they can make a family-sustaining wage, and that they can do that through a lot of different educational opportunities and pathways. So I think we need to talk about that. Now, when it comes to workforce protections, I'm grateful that the chairman has promoted me to be the chairman of the subcommittee on workforce protections. Again, I want to talk this Congress about what we can do through things like the tax code, about expanding paid maternity leave, expanding tax credits for childcare, expanding child tax credits so people have more money back in their pockets when they're raising children, and also expanding things like adoption and IVF tax credits for those that are looking to grow their families in those ways. We want to make sure that they can do that. I've presented those opportunities to the Ways and Means Committee, and hopefully some of those things will be taken up. I also want to talk about the fact that we need to crack down on unscrupulous employers who are utilizing illegal immigrant labor in this country. We need to expand the use of E-Verify to actually punish those businesses because they are doing the wrong thing. They're exploiting those individuals. They're taking advantage of their competition in the marketplace who are trying to do the right thing. And they're also taking advantage of social safety nets that everybody pays into when you pay legal wages through our workforce systems. So those are just some of the things I want to talk about. And with the last minute of my time, I'm actually going to bring up a bit of a niche subject, but it's on my top of mind for me because I just came from a Homeland Security Committee on workforce. So our House Republican caucus is talking about workforce all across the halls of Congress today, which is a great thing. And over in Homeland Security, we were talking about the need for a cybersecurity workforce. There are 500,000 positions that are unfilled in the cybersecurity space. And so there is a piece of legislation, the Cyber Pivot Act, which fits neatly into what I'm talking about here. It would be full scholarships through two-year programs at career and technical schools to get people into those entry-level cyber positions. It passed unanimously last session. Unfortunately, it didn't get across the goal line, but hopefully we can do that this time. Anybody on the panel, do you have an opinion on the need to expand our cyber workforce and what we can do about that?
So I was on I guess you'd call it a workforce, in the Biden administration to look at that very subject. And we concluded there was acute need in the cyber side. There's also acute need in firefighters and other kinds of frontline people. So it's a broad base. The research has been done. You should do an oversight hearing on that or some kind of an informational hearing to bring those plans to bear. There's quite a bit of data out there, and I think it's absolutely essential that we engage on that topic, and thank you for doing that.
Thank you. The gentleman's time has expired. I recognize my friend and the ranking member of this committee, the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Scott.
Thank you. Ms. Maietta,
You mentioned the apprenticeships and working with the Department of Labor, those that are registered apprenticeships. And can you assume, based on your comments, you'd like to see more of them?
The apprenticeship program has been really essential to our industry in allowing that trajectory to move up. And once graduated from the program, employees see a wage increase as well. We would love.
So they're a good thing.
They have been really beneficial. We would love to talk about expanding that.
Good, good. Ms. Milito, you mentioned the tax cuts for small businesses. Of the $4.5 trillion, how much of that tax cut are you talking about?
Sorry, of the $4.5 trillion, the dollar number you're talking about for the small business deduction, I don't know that I have that figure here with me right now, but I'm happy to provide that too. But it is, you know, in the scheme of things, again, remember, this is a small business tax deduction. This is not going to millionaires or.
So I mean, I think we could take care of the small businesses for about 15% of the $4.5 trillion. You don't have to bust the whole budget to help small businesses. Ms. Shierholz, you mentioned the size of the federal workforce. Was part of your comment too the fact that of the federal budget, only 5% of the, less than 5% of the federal budget goes to the federal workforce? And that if you, I mean, if you cut it 20%, you wouldn't have gotten 1% of the budget.
You said it. Yeah, that's the right way. The math just isn't there. You can't cut the federal, you can't cut your way to anything by cutting the federal budget, federal workforce.
And wages versus inflation, I thought the wage inflation had caught up with the inflation. It started off pretty bad in the first year, but when inflation got really bad, the American Rescue Plan Act provided for the median family of four over $5,000 in stimulus checks, $6,000 in child tax credits, enhanced SNAP benefits, reduced health care costs. If you add all that up and put that in there, can you say something about wages and inflation?
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. The idea that inflation is outpacing nominal wages is absolutely wrong unless you cherry pick the numbers. If you do what economists typically do, which is compare where we are now to the last business cycle peak, that's the sort of straightforward way to do it. It is unambiguous that working people, low-wage workers, middle-wage workers, high-wage workers, all have higher inflation-adjusted wages now than they did at that last business cycle peak in 2019.
Now, President Trump is crediting his miserable job performance to COVID-19 pandemic. Isn't it true that the pandemic started in March of 2020 and ended in January 2023? So he had about 11 months of the pandemic. Biden had about 2 years and was able to create jobs. Is that right?
Yep, that's right.
Okay, and can you say a word about the stimulative effect on the economy of tax cuts to the rich and the American Rescue Plan Act investments?
Yeah, okay, so the American Rescue Plan Act, that was a thing, it was passed in early 2021 after the job gains due to reopening the economy had run their course and we were still down millions of jobs. It was the thing that set us up for the incredibly strong jobs recovery that we had. The tax cuts that are in the House budget plan, the totally extremist House budget plan, will go entirely, almost entirely, overwhelmingly to very rich households, and that could actually put a drag on the economy. We are in a period of a very strong economy, and at a time like this, increasing the deficit by as much as the House plan is going to do actually may translate into a drag on the economy.
Well, tax cuts to the rich have not traditionally done much for the economy at all. Is
Fair.
that right?
Yes, yes.
And investments that affect people who will actually spend the money do a lot better. And can you say a word? We've had comments about the enhanced unemployment compensation I thought there were studies about that showed that it didn't make any difference.
Yeah, and what the general sort of weight of the literature shows, that unemployment insurance does keep people unemployed for a little bit longer than they would if they didn't have it. But you know why? Because they are staying in the labor force looking for work, because they are required to be actively looking for work to get the unemployment insurance benefits. It's not that they get unemployment insurance benefit and as soon as it runs out, they get a job. That is not what that sort of spike at benefits.
But the states that ended the enhanced unemployment compensation compared to those that did not end the enhanced unemployment compensation, they continued it, people going back to work was the same, is that right?
Yes, that's exactly right, yes.
Well, the gentleman's time has expired, but I also recognize him for his closing comments.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, the gentleman from California suggested that the acting Secretary of Labor, Ms. Sue, was serving illegally. I would ask him to produce some documentation of that allegation, because I think that was tried in court and found that she was serving perfectly legally. He may not have liked it, but she was serving legally. So I'd like him to produce some evidence to support that allegation. And again, Mr. Chairman, I'd ask you to join us in getting answers to what DOJ and President Trump are doing at the Department of Labor and other agencies. For example, what is happening at the NLRB and EEOC, and what information does DOJ have access to, like files of investigations into his own businesses, bids, can he get bids of his competitors? Does he have access to job numbers and things like that before they're public? And do any conflict of interest rules apply to anything he's done? We don't have to do anything, but we would like to just ask questions and get answers. And so, Mr. Chairman, we've heard about job creation during the Biden administration, and while we saw, while at the same time, we saw him reducing the deficit. He created more jobs in 4 years than any president in the history of the United States, and more jobs in 4 years than any Republican was able to do, whether they served 4 or 8 years. President Clinton did more in 8 years. But we know that, so we know how to do this. We just have to pass a fiscally responsible budget that effectively invests in the economy, and we'll get good results. The last thing we need is a budget that we pass, like the one we passed last night, showering massive tax cuts on the wealthy, the top 1% in corporations, and we just heard that that doesn't do anything for the economy because they don't spend the money. We don't need that kind of showering of tax cuts, and then don't need to make people pay for it with cuts in Medicaid, education, and other essential services. And add insult to injury, the budget, after all the speeches, incredibly ends up with a deficit worse than if we'd done nothing. I don't know how well, I didn't vote for it. So I hope we can do better, Mr. Chairman, and at that I yield back.
I thank the gentleman, and I think we agree on a number of things. It's just how we get to that. We've heard amazing statements today during this hearing, which I think has been a great hearing. And I appreciate the witnesses who were at the table, all four. It shows the opportunity of ideas and which ideas work and work best. We've heard about the framework resolution, the budget resolution, that indeed was a framework. And I appreciate my colleagues on the other side of the aisle hanging pieces of that framework on the framework and conjecture that's been given. I don't appreciate, and I would hope that it wouldn't continue. Fear-mongering that intensifies without, I would suggest, fact and reality at this point in time. We would all agree that we have a challenging situation economically in this country right now. We would all agree that we'd want to get to the reason, the rationale behind that. But I would hope we would have more concern about our taxpayers and our businesses that supply the economy for our taxpayers, themselves personally and within our country, than we would have for big government, or, as it's been called today, tiny government. And that tiny government, if that's a quote we want to use, still produces nothing as far as the economy. They don't generate one dime. That's where it comes from, the businesses and the individuals, the blue collar and white collar and whatever collar workers that are out there doing the work that has made America what it is. The envy of the world. We're not perfect, but we have patterns and systems that have worked. There's a reason that the Biden administration didn't do away with the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. Thank God. That it stayed in place and continues to this day, and we know the impact. We can put out statistics for almost anything, but the fact of the matter that 77 million people decided they wanted something different in the last 4 years, and 75 million people voted for a congressional body to take us in a different direction than what was going on the last year, I think is significant, that we ought to recognize. I think there are things that we agree with that are in the workforce space. We owe a reauthorization. Workforce Pell, and other things in the CTE space that we can agree on and work together and have minor differences, but the general issues are there. But from my perspective, I'm not giving away the fact that we represent the blue-collar worker. We're not going to relinquish that because of what they add to this great country. They're a vital American group. And in the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, they receive the biggest benefit. That's a fact. And of course, we'll debate that. But that's what is there. We've heard a lot about how the Biden administration's radical regulatory agenda has harmed American workers and the economy. However, with President Trump back in the White House and a Republican-led Congress, job creators are optimistic for the return, and polling is showing that. The surveys are showing that optimism for pro-growth policies that support and strengthen our workforce and businesses. The committee is committed to considering legislative solutions to improve the standard of living of American workers, reduce the burdens on business, and strengthen the economy. And that includes things like WIOA reauthorization and Workforce Pell and the rest. So thank you again for giving us a lot of ideas that we can knock around and we can ruminate on. That's an agricultural term, you know. But I think we can, in working together, we can get it right. And the American people and the American industry and the small businesses and the entrepreneurs and the blue collar and the white collar and striped collar workers will benefit from it. With no other business to come before the committee stands adjourned.